Welcome in, everyone.
Hello.
This is Everything Sucks, Let's Fix It, episode 9. My name is Ben Mayer.
My name is Anthony Buono.
And today is July 16th, 2023.
I can't believe we're on episode 9 already.
It's exciting.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have a boatload of current events to get into today.
It's been a busy week. It's been a busy week.
It's been a busy week, and I'd say we're getting more and more engrossed in this news, in this information.
Yeah, we know what to look for now.
Yeah.
We know what to look for. I think we know what's important.
I think so. And we are looking excitedly.
Yeah.
So
like all of our YouTube feeds just must be like just so lame.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. All of my shorts are right now GOP primary interviews and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but again, we're starting with important things. So the first one we have on this list is something that went mostly under the radar as far as we could tell.
I didn't even hear about it until you brought it up to me.
Yeah. It was a privacy breach that happened with tax prep companies. There was a congressional probe that was studying tax industry giants like TaxSlayer, H&R Block, Tax Act. And what they found is that these tax service companies were sharing private data with Google and Meta to enhance their advertising services.
Oh, what a nightmare.
Isn't that insane?
Remember when we were reading Stiglitz, he was talking about how this massive amount of data could be used to directly price goods based off people's profiles.
Exactly.
And you could adjust prices based off what other people can spend.
Mm-hmm.
And if these companies and these advertising agencies are now knowing what everyone's gross income is or what their tax refund just was, that's going to be crazy.
Especially when all of these goods are going to be priced on a digital market, right? Yeah. So you can make it so that they don't even know what the overall prices are. They're only seeing the one that they're seeing.
Yeah.
There was a quote in here that I really like. There's a law professor at Georgetown University and former consumer protection chief at the FTC. He says, on a scale of from 1 to 10, this is a 15. This is as great as any privacy breach that I've seen other than exploiting kids.
Wow.
This is a 5-alarm fire if what we know about this so far is true.
So these tax agencies, they were sending information like gross income, size of tax refund. Was it like everything?
I'm searching the article right now. The webpage title is an online tax software.
Because that's just so much information for these advertisers to be playing with now. Like if they know the size of your family, everything.
Yeah, I'm not seeing what the exact data was.
Okay.
Oh, it says beyond ordinary personal data such as names, phone numbers, and email addresses, the list of information includes taxpayer data, the details about their filing status, adjusted gross income, the size of their tax refunds, and even information about the buttons and text fields they clicked on while filling out their tax forms, which could reveal what tax breaks they may have claimed or which government programs they use.
Wow. That's insane.
It's unprecedented, totally illegal. I would expect a massive fine to be coming down the pipeline for these companies.
Is this a fine to the tax companies or a fine to Meta and Google? Did Meta and Google buy this information from these tax companies and they sold it to them?
I think so.
Yeah.
But
right?
I think that the prosecution would then be against the tax companies.
Okay.
Right? They're the ones who are supposed to be protecting the data.
Right.
So,
and they're the ones who are packaging it and then selling it piece by piece.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely nuts.
So this is when we talk about the right to own your data, this is at the forefront of that. The private companies shouldn't have the ability to totally manipulate their algorithms so perfectly to your data, which should belong to you. And you should see some type of protection of it.
That's the thing.
It
needs to belong to you. You need to give consent for it to be sold, and ideally be compensated some way if it is sold.
Right.
That's what Stiglitz talked about as well.
You got to be compensated. And I hate even the idea, what scares me about the consent to share the data is it's no one's going to read the terms of services or check off. They're just going to hit accept all and move on. And stuff like that needs to be illegal too.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
I think it does make more sense. And I think I talked about this as if you're paying for a Meta service, for example, with your data because they're all free up front, Still though, and I guess that's more okay because it's kind of obvious, right? Like, you know that Meta is selling your data to be advertised to. But I guess some people might be more iffy because maybe you think that Meta is just selling the advertising space on their website rather than your data directly to these companies.
Right. They just Meta. Ideally, Meta should be selling a public square to companies to put billboards up, pretty much, right? They shouldn't be selling the people in the courtyard. Yeah. And that's kind of what's happening now.
Exactly.
You know? And without compensation or better data protection, this is going to keep happening. Now, I also hate these tax companies like H&R Block. I hate all these people because the IRS should just be telling us how much we owe for taxes, and then we should be paying it.
Yes.
You know, the IRS should be in the business of doing these things for us 100%. Like, they know the number. Just give us the check or give us the bill and we'll pay it.
Yeah.
Don't make us go to these companies, pay them. In the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration is now creating an e-filing system through the IRS for the first time. Yeah. They're running a pilot program in the next 2 years. They're going to start developing one.
That's exciting.
Yeah, because these companies have been lobbying TurboTax, have been lobbying Congress for a long time to keep their industry alive, but it's just not needed anymore. We have more sophisticated ways to do it through the government that won't cost anybody anything.
Yeah, it's such an easy fix through the government that can just save consumers so much money.
Yeah,
because it doesn't need to be a profit generating business.
Or privacy, because if these companies go free to use, right, they can say the way we make our money is through your data, and then this is what happens.
Yeah,
and this is a way. It's a terrible alternative. So yeah, TurboTax needs to go away. And they should be sued and fined out the butt.
Yeah,
they're probably they're probably going to pay some type of settlement for this. I can't imagine they want to go to court and fight this. No, they're going to take a settlement.
Yeah, it should be billions.
Billions,
I expect.
Yeah,
we'll see.
But that insane story.
It is wild.
Keeping up with the FTC stuff. Our next story is kind of a part 2 on a story we did a couple weeks ago. We have more information about the Microsoft Activision merger. So, Ben, what's going on with that?
Yeah, so we talked about how the FTC, led by Lina Khan, has been trying to stop Microsoft from buying Activision. Specifically, Activision makes video games, including Call of Duty. We talked about how it would be anti-competitive for Microsoft to be able to only produce these games on Xbox. Of course, Activision and Microsoft have argued that they're going to still sell the games to all platforms. Right. We're skeptical. The FTC was skeptical. That's why they were fighting this. But a recent court decision removed the restriction on the acquisition from Microsoft. So they've been able to go ahead, and I actually think just a few days ago it went through.
No way.
And Microsoft now officially owns Activision-Blizzard.
Unbelievable. It's crazy because Activision was the first third-party developer in the video game industry. The first owners of Activision were actually working at Atari.
Really?
And they were only making Atari 2600 games. In 1977 with the Atari 2600, that's when it came out. And they're being grinded out the ass. You know, it's so much terrible. They were being grind to the bone in Atari. And they decided, screw it. You know what? We don't need you. We don't need Atari. We're going to go and do our own thing. So Activision splits from Atari and they become the first third-party developer. Terrible circle here that they are now reaccumulated by a large video game conglomerate when that was not what they were in the beginning. Yeah. Right. And originally they kind of started out as like a workers taking power type thing of being like, you know, sticking it to the bosses and like, we're going to walk away from you. We're done with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But now they're like, we want to walk away from it all. So give us $70 billion.
$70 billion. And speaking of workers fighting for their rights, my transitions are just getting better and better.
Smoother and smoother.
All right. So
you're going to make it hard for me to actually edit these clips to only have the one event on YouTube.
Oh, true.
Where exactly do I cut this?
We should clap in between each current event story. Yeah. That won't ruin the flow for everybody who's just listening. But
of course not.
Okay. So we have some massive strikes in America going on. That is really exciting.
Yeah. And we will be talking about.
Yes. We're talking about it now.
Oh, okay.
Let's go to that one.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah. So we have the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild in California going on strike. And the Writers Guild has been on strike for a while. Ben and I, we both went to Boston University, and at the recent graduating commencement speech was given by a Warner Brothers executive.
David Zaslav.
That's his name. Okay. And a lot of our fellow students protested him during the speech in solidarity with the Writings Guild. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. And the I think members of the guild were also outside, like carrying signs and protesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So why are the Writers Guild, why are they on strike? So the main focus points of the dispute are with residuals with streaming. They claim that the share of residuals has been cut a lot since the advent of and popularity of streaming services over regular cable broadcasting.
Yeah.
Which as a consumer, I never even thought about. Like I just thought I thought it worked the same. It's like every time I stream Friends on HBO Max, what's his name? The guy who plays Chandler Bing gets a check in the mail. Like I just thought that was still happening.
Yeah.
I guess not.
I think they still are, but I'm assuming that at the advent of streaming, the residuals were negotiated to be lower because it would be harder to track just how much money each individual show is bringing in. Like I'm sure they can see the number of views, but because you're getting such a wider array of content in the subscription, whereas like Friends, when it was originally on NBC or whatever, when it first aired, right, they know exactly how many people are tuning in to watch that show every week, and so the advertisers know exactly how many eyes they're going to get on their ads. Right. It's not a direct translation like that anymore.
Right. Like Max or HBO Max, whatever, terrible decision to change their name. Point is, they don't know how much of the people who are subscribing to Max subscribe for Friends.
Yes.
So it's hard for them to determine how much that residual should be. So they're fighting to get a larger share of the residuals. And they're also fighting against artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
They are worried that ChatGPT is going to be used to basically write scripts that writers should have been writing and have been writing since the beginning.
Yeah.
You know?
And so I actually read, there's a sheet, like a 2-page sheet that outlines the specific proposals that the Writers Guild has made, and that AMPTP, which is basically what the studios negotiate under. So you'll have Disney, Universal, all of these studios, Netflix negotiating under a joint banner. And on the AI proposal, what WGA has proposed, there's been no counteroffer from the studios, from AMPTP, and that's true for a lot of their requests. But it was particularly striking to me because this seems like a place where I think these studios are probably licking their chops trying to get rid of the writers.
I think this is like one of the best applications of ChatGPT that I could think of. It's journalists who write news stories and writers who write, pretty standard sitcoms and stuff like that. I feel like that's like the perfect area for ChatGPT to really take up a lot of the market and do a lot of damage to the labor market.
And it's funny because, or it's not funny, but even with the advent of streaming shows, the transition from a 22 episode season that goes from September through May, right? And to a streaming show that usually has maybe 10 episodes per season at most. Writers generally have just been working for much less time because there's a lot less to write.
Yeah.
So pre-production, they work for less time. During what it's called is post-greenlight, when the show is actually filming, they're working less. So, and since they're paid on a weekly basis, they're getting paid less. So they're asking for greater assurances as far as how long they get to work, how many writers you have in a writer's room at once, because since these are smaller series, they can do it with fewer writers.
Right.
And of course, AI is only looking to further that decrease in dependency on them.
Definitely. And so the Writers Guild is trying to yield writers about $429 million more a year. That's what they're aiming for. And then AMPTP's offer is about like $86 million more dollars. So that's currently the divide.
Yeah.
It's a pretty massive chasm. And they've been on strike for like at least over a month now, right? I mean, it's got to be at least a month and a half, maybe 2 months by now.
Yeah.
So how this breaks, I don't know, but they recently got a lot of backup.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Actors Guild is now going on strike. And the Actors Guild is going on strike for fairly similar reasons with the AI stuff.
And residuals.
Yep. And it looks like, they have very similar interests, the writers and the actors. So they're going to be great allies in this fight.
Definitely.
This is the first time that the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild is on strike since the 1960s. And in the 1960s, Ronald Reagan was the president of the Actors Guild representing them, which is hilarious. Which is actually why Ronald Reagan was very popular with union guys when he ran for president, because he was the head of a union.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that they're talking about with AI is how extras could be used, like to film for one day. They'll scan their face, and then they won't need to pay the extra for like the rest of the 20 days of filming, because they can just input that AI generated face off that scan throughout the background, and they don't need them for the rest of the days.
Yeah. This is tangential but related. I just saw an interview where someone was talking about what the future of entertainment might look like with AI, and someone was describing like might have just vague ideas of the genre you want to watch, the amount of time you want your story to go. Maybe you have an actor in mind, and maybe you can just input that into an AI generator and you can get a film made for you. And something like that, they would find ways to massively compensate big actors who are being chosen as faces for these films all the time, right?
Yeah.
But everyone else is going to get nothing. It's going to be completely out of work. So choosing now as the time to fight for their rights is crucial. The one other thing I want to stick on this $429 million a year. There was a breakdown of what this would cost the different studios. Disney was leading the list at $75 million.
That's it?
That's nothing to Disney. That's nothing to Disney, and it's nothing to any of the rest of these studios, which to me just really emphasizes how much corporate greed we're seeing here.
Yeah, well, we can see, this is a good quote that was from an anonymous AMPTP executive. He said, "We are going to allow things to drag on until union members start losing their apartments and losing their houses to force these unions into a less favorable negotiation." That's a quote from the guy. What a piece of shit.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible.
And what I'm happy to see is that we're in a time in America that labor unions have the highest approval since 1965. Americans approve labor unions at 71%.
That's exciting.
That's super exciting. The low was 48% in 2010. We're at 71% in 2023. It's amazing.
Yeah, that is awesome.
And I think more of these cool, important labor actions are going to keep moving that number up. Now, July is a very interesting month for labor. We have the Writers Guild strike going on. We have the Actors Guild strike happening. We also have the UPS strike possibly in the works.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about that a lot in the next 2 weeks.
I think they've gone on strike. I thought it's begun.
No.
Are you sure?
I'm almost positive it hasn't begun yet.
Okay, because I thought I saw AOC with the president of the union.
That is, that's them prepping. They're doing practice pickets.
Okay.
Yeah, because the deadline is the end of July.
I see.
Yeah, the deadline is end of July. So over the next 2 weeks, that's when everything's going to go to a head. And if they do go on strike, it will be the largest strike in American history. I think it's like 350,000 workers.
I thought it was 430,000.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, it is wonderful. And it's funny, this perfectly will connect to our book reading, our book club this week.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah, so exciting to see. I hope SAG and WGA get what they want.
Yeah, easily. Yeah. I mean, if you're telling me that it's going to cost Disney, how much did you say?
430.
Okay.
No, 75.
Yeah, 75. I think their CEO makes $27 million.
Yeah.
David Iger?
Bob Iger.
Bob Iger's salary is $27 million. 3 of his salaries make up the whole of the demands.
Here's what I'm thinking is, even since that is cheap, the $75 million is relatively cheap for Disney. But what they're thinking more is the effects of AI down the line.
It's the opportunity cost of AI that they'll be giving up by giving into these demands now.
Exactly.
One more cool note that I want to say during the premiere of Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy and the rest of the cast walked out when the strike was called of the premiere in London. And I thought that was awesome.
It's really cool because there are interviews of them on the red carpet talking about the impending strike, and then like afterwards you see you see a clip of Christopher Nolan inside the theater right before the premiere is about to happen, and he talks about how they've all left. So it's literally like within hours of the premiere actually happening, which is awesome.
And I like to see that the big actors aren't selling out the little actors.
Yes, right? Everyone is in solidarity right
everyone.
now.
And that's the key. That's the key to make it happen. With the UPS strike, one of the big demands is to raise the pay of part-time workers.
Yeah.
But all the full-time workers are fully behind them. Because I think a full-time worker, $43 an hour, something like that. Part-time is at like $16.50 an hour.
Yeah.
And they're fighting to get that part-time number up. So yeah, we'll talk more about the labor disputes and all that as we go. But let's move into the American economy.
Okay.
The CPI report has come out for the month of June, and we got some more great news.
Yeah, amazing inflation news.
Really good stuff. So we have month-to-month inflation being 0.2%. Last month it was 0.1%, but 0.2, that's where you want to be. That's where you want to see it. We have the 12%, the 12-month change down at 3% for the month of June.
Yeah.
Which is just an incredibly huge improvement from last month of June being at 9%.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really in the right direction. If you remove, so that is with all items, food, energy. If we remove food and energy, because as we discussed, that is the most volatile things, and we talk about core CPI, core inflation, it's at 5.8%. Still decreasing, not as rapidly decreasing as overall general inflation.
Okay, I thought it was 4.8.
4.8, you're right.
Okay.
No, it's 4.8, you're right.
Okay. Which is still less than economists were predicting.
Yes, still all of this was still less than economists were predicting. This blew everyone out of the water. This is what we wanted to see.
Mm-hmm.
So what's really dragging down the CPI is coming from energy costs. Over a 12-month time frame, we're seeing fuel oil drop 36%. We have gasoline dropping 26%, and utility piped gas services dropping 18% since last year. So all that's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
The sticking point here is shelter. The shelter index was the largest factor in the monthly increase for all items. All other indexes were good except for shelter. And shelter is going to be the one that it's going to be hard to bring down. It's kind of, especially since people sign leases for rents, it's kind of hard to adjust prices downward. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
Well, like we signed a lease that had a 10% raise increase.
Sure.
That's what it is for the next year. That's what it is. I can't get out of that.
Yeah.
So now that's kind of stuck there.
True.
So only new rental units have the opportunity to bring it down.
So as far as year over year, that's kind of just what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah, the year over year is going to be hard to bring down for a while. But, you know, the way that the interest rates hike works, they are going to be most effective in bringing demand for housing down, because the demand for housing is very highly correlated with your interest rate.
Yes.
Demand for housing goes way up when interest rates are down because the monthly payments are way cheaper.
Yeah, it's going to bring demand for housing down, but there still is a high demand for housing because we have a housing shortage.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. I've read about in the Boston area specifically, we have a massive housing shortage. And the market is kind of stuck because even if people do want to move, not only is there not enough housing for anyone, but also they are in mortgages where they maybe have a 3% interest rate. And right now, if all they're getting offered is 6%, no one's going to take that. And if there isn't movement, then you also can't allow people to get out of rent. So there are fewer first-time home buyers. The market is just kind of stuck in every way right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this from the political perspective now. This is kind of ruining the Republican narrative of that the economy is really bad and everything is terrible, because it's not anymore.
It wasn't even before.
Right.
I don't think. Like, inflation was the only thing they had to hang their hat on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now that that's going away, I don't want to say it's gone, because you don't want it at, 3%. You want it like 2, but that's not.
Oh, I thought 3 was okay.
3 is fine. You want the Federal Reserve's goal is 2%.
Okay.
But economists are arguing that maybe 3% is the new normal.
Okay.
And people are suggesting, why did we even have 2% in the first place? Maybe 3%. I've heard some people saying the 3.5. Like, it's a debate. The point is, it's in the range of normality now.
Sure.
It's not out of the ordinary. Core inflation, I still want to see come down because energy prices are so volatile.
Yeah.
You could definitely see something happening in the oil industry brings these prices back up. Yeah. And then we have the inflation narrative starting up again.
Well, to me, that's almost an argument for just trying to become more self-dependent as far as oil. I saw a video recently about how the reason that we import a lot of oil is because there's a different type of crude that we are better equipped to refine. And the stuff that we actually drill in American waters or on American soil is not that same oil.
Right.
But on the other hand, American refiners are becoming more aware of geopolitical tensions getting in the way of their supply chains. So they are probably going to be building out a better capacity for the type of oil that we actually drill.
Yeah.
And that's the type of thing that means that we can maintain stable energy prices.
And that would be the goal. And I think like the only thing that I'm concerned about with refiners is I don't think they're going to have they don't have the long-term incentive to build up their infrastructure because of climate change. Yeah. And we don't want to be using this oil 25, 20 years from now, 15 years from now. We don't want to be using it. And they know that that's the government's direction. And they don't want to be investing large dollars knowing that that's the way that the world is going.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it hard to build up those new refineries.
I get that.
I don't know what the solution is to that.
No.
Unless you just want to say a publicly funded massive refinery program that is a government-owned corporation that's going to be in the business of doing refining of oil.
Yeah.
But that's awesome, but I don't think that's feasible.
There is no political gain to be had there.
No,
because leftists will hate it because it's still oil refinery, and the right wing will hate it because it's a massive government corporation.
You know what? I might go down the middle here. I think 10% of the left would hate it because it's destruction of climate or bad for climate. I think 10% of the right will hate it because it's government overreach. But I think a lot of people would see their gasoline and their fuel prices go down and they'd be like, this is great.
I don't think...
You don't think that would work?
I don't think that's how it would be publicized.
Sure. It wouldn't be publicized.
Because they wouldn't see the prices change until the operation was in effect.
True.
So as soon as the planning was being floated, everyone would shit on it.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right. But yeah, so that was the CPI report. Really amazing stuff.
Went well.
Let's go on to international economics. And we have some crazy news coming out of China.
Shocker,
right? I feel like this is the China show.
Hopefully maybe we should rebrand.
So we are looking at Chinese exports and how they've changed over the last year.
Some new data just came out on this.
And year over year, Chinese exports are down 12.4%,
which is huge. Not particularly surprising if you've listened to this show at all, as the U.S., who has been China's biggest trading partner, and the West in general have been trying to lower their reliance, and the U.S. has been trying to decouple to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, this is decoupling in a chart. I think and not only are exports falling, so are imports. So imports have fallen. Oh, you know what? I don't think it's 12.4% year over. No, it is. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It is.
It's 12.4% year over year. Imports are down 6.8% year over year. So what's interesting about that number is China is a manufacturing hub.
Mm-hmm.
They are taking raw materials from United States, from other countries, taking it to China, and then they're manufacturing it and they're selling it back to us, right? If they're importing less stuff, their manufacturing potential a year from now or next month or 2 months from now is less than what it was because they're receiving less things to manufacture.
Sure.
And that's only going to bring their exports down even more. So United States, some of their biggest trading partners, other biggest trading partners, their first biggest trading partner is the South Asian Economic Bloc, Cambodia, Laos. They make up about in between January and June of 2023. We have the South Asian countries.
Southeast
Asian countries.
Just to be clear.
Thank you. making up 16% of their exports.
Yeah.
Then the European Union at 16%. Then the US at 14%.
And I feel like that's a big point because the US is 14 alone. We're talking about a conglomeration of Southeast Asian countries and a conglomeration of European countries as only two.
And then America,
the US is only 2% less than those massive bodies of countries.
And that's insane.
Yeah.
And then all the way at the bottom, we have Russia at 3%.
Yeah.
So people are saying like, oh, maybe China can take all of their stuff that they were selling to America and then sell it to Russia. Well, we're seeing that change. We have a year-on-year change in cumulative exports. In the United States, they're down 12%. In Russia, they're up 92%.
Absurd. That's what was so shocking to me. Like, was almost exciting just because I was like, we have been talking about these global economic movements for so long on this podcast, and this data is just screaming that we're right.
Yeah.
Right?
It's screaming it.
Yeah. It is. It's such an
We've been doing this
change.
for 2 months and we're already experts. We were after our chips discussion, we kind of became experts in semiconductors naturally.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. And we came across a New York Times article that was massive. It's like it's like the audio version is like 30 minutes long. You know? And we listened to it, and it's literally verbatim what we were talking about 2 weeks ago. It's like we could have written this thing for the New York Times.
And it's so funny because the main contributor, not the main contributors to the article, but the people that they got for the interviews that they kept quoting throughout. One was someone who I read 2 articles from on CSIS and got like a lot of my info from. One was an author of a book that you were taking a lot of your information from that you had read.
And it's like we got to the primary sources before the New York Times did.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
It is great.
So point is we're right. And so Russia is taking up a lot of more Chinese exports, but they're still only at 3%.
They don't have the market.
They don't have the consumer demand.
Close.
And now China is struggling a lot because they lack the internal consumer demand.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a consumer demand internally in China to make up for the lack of stuff being sold outside of their country.
Yeah.
They don't. The consumers don't have the capital.
And this is where demographics become a huge part of the picture as well. China probably has the worst demographic picture in the world.
Yeah.
Russia might be second.
Probably.
Could be a pretty close second. The problem with having a demographic structure where you're shifted towards the older side of the demographic, right? And in China and Russia, they have more people over like between 60 and 70-year-olds than you have between 50 and 60, then 40 and 50, and so on and so on and so
Nightmare.
on. The older people get, the less they consume.
Mm-hmm.
So you're working with, sure, these are big countries. Russia has over 120 million people. China has 1.4 billion, maybe less based on how much they've been lying about their demographic data. But even so, without the 335 million robust U.S. market with a much stronger demographic picture, it looks much worse.
Much worse. So we were talking about the demographics of China. They have too many old people, not enough young people. And the young people are the consumers. The 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds. Those are the people who are buying houses. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who are buying baby food. Those are the people who are consuming.
Yes. And
China has one of the worst younger unemployment rates in the world. 25% of young people are unemployed.
I think it's 20.8%.
Okay, so 20 to 25%. I've heard 25, but 20 to 25% unemployed.
I just want to try to be as right as possible.
Yeah. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Though their high consumer population is not in the ability to consume right now. They don't have the capital.
Yeah.
And so this is causing an internal desire to increase economic stimulus in China.
Mm-hmm.
So here is some stuff. We have the chief economist at Pinpoint Asset Management saying the big question in the next few months is whether domestic demand can rebound without much stimulus, because they don't know if the Politburo, which is meeting next month, is going to push through a stimulus package. And this is the Semiconductor China show. Chinese imports of semiconductors fell 13.6% in June, slower than 15.3% in May, but signaling limited appetite among Chinese manufacturers for components to re-export in finished goods. So there we go.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about was going to be happening over the next few months.
Yeah.
China will be importing less semiconductors. They're also importing less copper too, which is really signaling that they're their manufacturing capacity is kind of going down.
Definitely.
For the first time. And when we say China is slowing down, they're still growing, right? China's not like falling into a recession of the type of like they're going to have negative economic growth, but they're going to be having 3%, 4% growth instead of the 10%, 11% growth that we saw in the early aughts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Even then, I mean, they're at least going to have 3-4% on paper.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if, I guess it's harder for China to fall into a recession because it's easier for the government to stimulate the economy. And I really expect this stimulus to come through in the coming weeks because there are so many signs of weakness right now. And even though, I don't know, it's not fixing the core issues, it won't be fixing the core issues, but it's going to make it's going to soften any decline that is happening.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the answer is for China. I mean, they need these goods that were getting exported to be consumed locally.
Yeah.
And by other trading partners. Africa, maybe. Africa was increasing 24% more in the exports, but Africa obviously doesn't have the consuming power the U.S. does. So figuring out who to offload these goods to.
I just think they're screwed because it's these goods, but also I think the decrease in foreign investment and American investment is going to be absolutely crippling to them. It's going to make it so that they don't have the capacity to supply the goods the same way either.
Right.
Without supply or demand, you don't have an economy.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's move on to the Russian economy. With the Russian economy, we have their current budget problems with their war in Ukraine. Russian revenue has fallen 22%, while spending rose by 26% compared to the same time last year. So we're seeing a massive divergence in revenue versus spending. And Russia has forecasted a budget deficit that will reach $43 billion in 2023. And this is 1/3 of the state spending that they were expected to go to defense and security. So it's a really massive explosion of their budget deficit. Total government spending in 2022 amounted to 31 trillion rubles, exceeding the pre-war forecast by over 1/3, and the amount spent in 2021 by over 1/4. So we're seeing a real explosion of their spending here, trying to keep up with the West's continued support into Ukraine.
Yeah.
You know,
they need to keep their war effort fueled.
And then the question is, how is Russia affording this? How is Russia financing all of this? Obviously, some of it is through deficit spending, but they are raising money. And where is Putin raising the money from? Well, recently, Russia is dealing with a massive decrease in their revenues because of the international price cap that we've put on Russian oil. So the European countries and the United States is still buying Russian oil, but they're only buying it at a specific set price under the market value, which is meaning that a lot of money that Russia should be making off their oil is just not coming in. And then on top of that, we have the dropping costs of fuel prices globally anyway that we talked in the CPI report. The massive commodities that Russia exports is getting crushed. And on top of this, their big exports. What are Russians' big exports? Grain, wheat, lumber, metals. All of these commodities are dropping in price on the international market. So this is their budget collapsing in front of them. And this is something that they could have really estimated. This is just the market doing its thing.
Sure.
And so now, what is Putin doing to try to raise more money? Well, he's putting in place a lot of windfall taxes on the state corporations. On one state-owned corporation, Gazprom, which is a massive oil company, they're putting on 1.5 trillion ruble windfall tax. Just taking money out of that, really going after the profits that they've made. And this is going to decrease the amount of investment being made in the local economy because now it's going right to the war effort.
Yeah.
You're trading butter for guns.
Exactly.
That's what's happening.
Yeah. And just for the listeners, that windfall tax of 1.5 trillion, that's about $20 billion.
Yeah.
So imagine the US government just saying, no, Microsoft, we're going to pluck $20 billion just from your war chest because we actually decided we need it more.
Right. And they're only using this money for guns.
Yeah.
Right. They're only using this money for guns. They're not using it for anything else. And it's because of the continued support from NATO, the US, the G7, because of our continued support to Ukraine. That's why Russia's in this position that they need to be taking all this money out of their economy. And he's really just it's almost like he's emptying his country from the inside out.
Yeah. To me, it makes the oil price cap from the G7 seem like a really good idea, because if you do something like try to eliminate buying Russian oil entirely, first of all, you're risking deindustrialization of some of these Western countries that have been so dependent on Russia.
Sure.
But you're also potentially prompting a much harsher reaction from the Russian side. By capping the price on oil, you're still hamstringing their economy, but you're reducing the risk. You're mitigating that much better.
And you're also stopping the creation of like a black market for the oil, right? Because if you were going to say no oil, no way, we're not taking any Russian oil.
Yeah.
They'll say, okay, maybe it's worth investing like $40 billion to try and get around this. But if you're going to only put a price cap on it, it no longer makes that $40 billion investment trying to create a black market alternative worth it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's really the perfect recipe. It really is.
I like it.
And now Russia's getting screwed. And the people of Russia are starting to get a little mad because of the internal economic situation. We have some labor strikes going on in the middle of Russia, specifically in the automotive industry, which is really great to see. They had a sit-in and a lockout of one auto company. And it was from a Russian news source, which I thought was pretty funny. And in it, they were talking about the NATO invasion of Russia.
Wow.
Referring to the war in Ukraine. And I just think that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Because I guess Ukraine is Russian territory.
Of course.
And NATO invaded it, I guess. I don't know.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's Russia falling apart from the inside out. And this is the country that China thinks that they can recouple with to replace the United States.
I mean, it's their only hope at the moment, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they have no hope.
No, that's true.
That's true.
It's the anti-China show here, folks.
Okay. And now let's get into some fun things that mean way, way less. Let's talk about the horse race for 2024.
Yeah.
My favorite thing.
Oh, yeah.
So Q2 fundraising numbers are out, and raising money is the most effective way to win a campaign. So these numbers are very, very important.
I'm still skeptical about this.
You're still skeptical about this?
Oh, yeah. We've talked about this before, and this was actually mentioned in this chapter of our book, which we'll get to, about how the money that is spent on campaigns, research has shown that it actually it's not often what decides the winner, but the reason that money tends to follow the winner is because donors are trying to curry favor.
Oh, sure.
And so it's more likely that it influences policy than it actually influences winners.
Okay.
That's my view.
It's also important to follow the fundraising numbers because you want to see how many people are taking the time to hit a donate button.
I agree with that.
The number of people who are actually taking the time to drop $10.
Yeah, well, that's why I think small money donations matter, but like who these enormous super PACs are supporting are a little bit less important in my opinion.
No, I totally agree. And we're going to talk about the DeSantis PAC because I think that's hilarious.
Yeah.
So let's start with Biden. What did Biden raise? So in the second quarter, Biden raised $72 million.
By far the most of any candidate.
By far the most.
Yeah.
We'll talk about double what Donald Trump raised.
Yeah.
He also has a $77 million war chest. That's what he's got on hand, which is the most amassed by any Democrat in any comparable point in history. So this is more than what Obama had in his 2020 election run at this point.
Yeah.
That's more than what he had. According to the Biden campaign, 97% of all of his donations were under $200, which I think is awesome.
That's wild.
Yeah. 97% were under $200.
That's like legitimately hard for me to believe. I mean, it's the Biden campaign saying it.
Yeah.
I have nowhere.
It's all public data. I mean, they can't really lie.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
They all put the data to the FEC.
Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to scrape through the data myself. So we'll just assume they're telling the truth, in which case it is remarkable because as you put here, like polls have shown that people don't want Biden to run.
I know. And despite that, he's raising a good amount of money.
And that's why I'm always skeptical about these polls, especially because Biden has really, like, okay, I get it. And the media makes a huge deal out of his age. I actually had a conversation with our friend John on this when he came about whether I thought Biden was a competent president. And I was like, Yes, because I look at what he does and what comes out of the office, and I judge him based on that.
Like
and
the administration around him is actually very competent.
Yeah, I mean, but we have no way of knowing that it's not Biden.
Right, we have no
People
way.
are just assuming because they're like, oh, he's a little inarticulate, he falls down occasionally, and I just don't think those are really good measures of the effectiveness of a president.
No, I totally agree.
So to me, like, I'm skeptical. I'm more skeptical of the polls that say people don't want Biden, especially when he's, I don't know, he seems like the face of the moderate part of the spectrum, and he's pursuing a progressive agenda to a good extent.
Like, I think he's a really good representative of the Democratic Party, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You know, I think, is he a good representative of the base? No, I don't think he's a good representative of the base. The base of the party is like progressives, you know, Black Americans. Is Joe Biden the perfect face for that? No, but Joe Biden is a good administrator of what they would like to see.
Yeah.
And is electable in a way that I think a lot of people do like.
Yeah.
And also with his approval numbers. His approval numbers
don't make sense to me.
Don't make sense to me at all. No. Because I don't know how much of that approval is disaffected Democrats who will still vote for him anyway just because they don't want to see Trump come back. Or an independent who will, even if they don't really approve of him, will look at the Republican Party and say, okay, I definitely don't want that. So I don't know what that approval number really means anything in regards to his reelection at all.
Well, to me, it just screams ignorance of the voter base. Yeah. To be honest, like, to me, it's like progressives are still thinking about how Bernie ran in 2020 against Biden and how Bernie didn't win. He's like, oh, Biden's a moderate, and so no, I disapprove of him.
Yeah. But we'll still vote for him.
Yeah, and you have moderates who maybe are more influenced by the constant questioning of his age and his mental capacity. And they're like, no, I don't want an old white man in there. And yes, they are still going to vote for him, but I think it's just easier to say disapprove to someone who isn't like a powerful, inspiring demagogue, even if his policy decisions have been good ones.
Yeah. I mean, like, Trump has a base of 40% of America, 35% of America that love him and will always answer approve in a poll. There's many situations where I could get called for a Joe Biden poll and I'll say disapprove, but I'm going to vote for Joe Biden and I'm going to be excited to vote for Joe Biden. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, but I'll probably put a disapprove on that list, you know, if some things go differently. And so I just don't know if that number correlates with his actual electoral prowess. We saw that in 2022, right? He had a massive, terrible approval rating, but Democrats still did really well in the Senate, did pretty okay in the House. It didn't translate.
Yeah.
So that's Joe Biden's numbers. This is another really cool thing that I like from Joe Biden's numbers. 30% of his donor universe were new donors who didn't donate to the 2020 campaign.
Wow.
So that's 30. Yeah.
That's exciting to me because that means there are some people who are paying attention.
Who are actually like, oh man, maybe Joe Biden's actually doing a good job and I didn't think he was before.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, I liked him. I liked him a little bit, but I didn't want to take the time to give him $10 out of my paycheck. But now I will.
Yeah, especially because it's not a different race than in 2020. It's still Biden-Trump. Because I'm trying to think, like, are there people who are galvanized at thinking about Trump? Well, no, they should have been just as worried in 2020, so they would have donated then.
Right. It seems like there's some actual difference here.
Yeah.
With those 30% of people. And in the final number, we have 400,000 donors from Joe Biden in this quarter. In the 2011 quarter, in Obama, when he was running for re-election, it was 552,000 donors. So it's a decrease from what Obama was able to make, that's for sure. But Joe Biden has so far amassed the most amount of cash out of a Democratic president running for re-election.
Interesting.
Next up, we got Trump.
Yes.
We have less info about Trump. It's not as exciting. He has raised $35 million between his campaign and his super PAC. But what's significant about this is it is way more than any other Republican candidate.
Yeah.
Just way more.
Which isn't surprising, especially to me if you're going off the logic of donors following a winner. Right. Trump remains the leader by far in all Republican primary polling. I don't know. To me, I can see people donating to DeSantis, which we'll talk about, because obviously he's second in the polling and people think that maybe he'll do a better job appealing to some of the right-wing base, the evangelicals specifically, I think about.
Yep.
But I don't know, if I'm betting on a Republican winner, I'm obviously betting on Trump.
Obviously. And I don't have the numbers for this, but I know that Trump is doing better with small dollar donors than any other Republican in the field. So Trump is doing better with small dollar donors. He really still has the base on lock.
That makes sense.
It's not like he's being propped up. And then we have Dems in the Senate. So there are a good amount of very competitive Senate races for 2024. The three big ones are West Virginia with Joe Manchin, Montana with Joe Tester, and Ohio with Sherrod Brown.
John Tester.
Yeah. What did I say?
Joe.
Oh, idiot. And I love John Tester. I don't know why. You know, John Tester on one of his hands is missing 3 fingers.
No.
Yeah, he was a farmer and I think he was working on a saw and he lost 3 of his fingers.
That's gotta be a great campaign story.
It totally is.
Yeah.
It totally is. He's running around Montana on a motorcycle with a missing fingers. Like, it's such a vibe.
Yeah.
You know. So these guys are raking a good amount of money. Both of them brought in about $5 million bucks, which is pretty good. This is Tester's best quarter ever. So that's really good to see from the Democratic perspective. The Republicans are locked in some pretty intense primaries in these Senate races.
Oh.
Yeah. So
okay.
I don't know much about the Ohio one. I'm not going to pretend I do. But in Montana, we have a split between this guy named Shealy and another Shealy, whatever, and another guy named Rosendale. Rosendale is hardcore Trump, hardcore America First. Hardcore has the Republican base like that. Shealy comes from out of state. And he's kind of being propped up by the Republican establishment in the Senate. Okay. He's a big fan. Mitch McConnell's very in favor of him. Rosendale's against Mitch McConnell. So there's this competition going on there, which is going to drain a good amount of Republican fundraising numbers prior to the general election, which gives John Tester a bit of an edge. Okay. Last race is from the Senate is Colin Allred in Texas. He's running against Ted Cruz. He raised $6.2 million, and that is more than what Beto O'Rourke was able to raise by this point in his challenge to Ted Cruz in 2018. So that is the best opportunity for a Democratic flip, is to take down Cruz and put in this guy, Colin Allred. I don't think Texas is going blue in 2024. I don't think that at all, but this is their best shot, and it's good that he's getting this money. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Texas is probably a better bet than Florida is now. Totally. Which has just become a red state and had been a swing state. Yeah. We'll see. I was watching Texas intently in the 2020 election, hoping that maybe it would go for Biden. Obviously, it didn't. And honestly, the discrepancy was still pretty decent. I think it's still Trump, like 5%. I mean, I thought it was like 8 points. Might be 8. Yeah. So it's still a big gap to make up. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. It all depends on how like Harris County and these big massive population centers go to the margins of which the Democrats are able to win it. Yeah, and how they turn out. So now we're going on to DeSantis. DeSantis raised $20 million, which is still super impressive. But this is in combination with his PAC and himself in this time frame. These $20 million. His campaign said that it is the largest filing for a non-incumbent Republican candidate in the first quarter of their candidacy in more than a decade, which is cool. But a lot of that PAC money is not coming from small dollar donors, and a lot of it is PAC money. Yeah. The super PAC supporting DeSantis never backed down. It has $130 million that it's raised since it was formed in March. It's a lot of money. Yeah. That's a lot of money. And it's incredible to think that they're going to burn all of that trying to take down Trump. Yeah. Like, that money's just going to go on fire, because I don't think DeSantis has a shot in hell. No. You know? And that's money that could be going against Joe Biden right now. So that's literally all the money that Joe Biden has on hand, his $140 million. Yeah. And they're going to burn that trying to take down Trump. Do you think they'll burn it all? Do you think at some point DeSantis will think it's clear that he's out of the race and he'll be like, all right, let's... No, because I think Ted Cruz could win Iowa. So I think Ted Cruz could win Iowa. Ted Cruz. Listen to me. Ron DeSantis could win Iowa. Okay. And my evidence for that is Ted Cruz winning Iowa in 2015. Yeah. So 2016. So I think DeSantis is going to go at it till Super Tuesday. Okay. Yeah, I think DeSantis is going to run until the end. I don't think he's never going to back down, as his name says in his pack, never back down.
Okay.
Other Republican candidates all did terrible.
Yeah. My favorite was Pence, only raising $1.2 million.
God.
Which was less than like Asa Hutchinson. No, it was more than Asa Hutchinson, who raised like $500,000. Less than Nikki Haley. Less than Vivek Ramaswamy. Yeah.
Dude,
yeah.
Imagine being the vice president and then getting less support and less money than Vivek Ramaswamy.
Who has never had a political position in his life.
Ever. I think it's hilarious. And now Pence is just so far down. And he's such a train wreck.
Yeah. I mean, Pence, we've talked about how we don't think DeSantis really has an avenue in this race. If DeSantis doesn't have an avenue, Pence definitely doesn't have an avenue.
No.
Yeah. The only reason he rose to prominence was because of the riding Trump's coattails.
Right.
And he totally hopped off those coattails as of January 6th. And so now there's nowhere to go.
And it's embarrassing because he's still like just trying to hold on.
Yeah.
And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It's like, what are you trying to do right now? No one, the people who you're trying to get to like you don't like you, dude. Just go home.
Yeah.
People like Tim Scott did raise a good amount of money, but just not enough to compete with DeSantis. I was watching Meet the Press this morning, and they had a Republican strategist on, and the Republican strategist was telling a lot of these PACs to give up on DeSantis and go to Tim Scott, which is what I've been saying for, if I was a Republican, I would be propping Tim Scott up as the alternative to Trump. But Trump has come out and said good things about Tim Scott, which leads me to believe that Tim Scott might be the VP pick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a whole battle going on, but I just think it's going to be Trump and it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah.
So there we go. There's our fundraising numbers. We'll go through the fundraising numbers on the next quarter too.
Sure.
And we'll, keep going with the 2024 horse race. Mm-hmm. But now it's time to learn, folks.
Yes.
It's time to learn about history.
Book club. This week it was about workers'
rights. We are reading Supreme Inequality by Adam Cohen.
Yes.
The 50-year battle to make a more unjust America. I think that's the subtitle.
Yeah.
But we are talking about workers' rights.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to start off in 2006 with Lilly Ledbetter. Mm-hmm. We talked about her a little bit in the prologue of the book. On the first episode, we covered this book. But now let's get into the nitty-gritty. So Justice Alito just comes to the court, replacing O'Connor in 2006. O'Connor was the steady moderate.
Yeah.
She was the swing vote. She decided if the decision was going to go to the liberal or conservative side. Alito comes in, throws that spectrum, takes the balance that they had, throws it off a cliff. Mm-hmm. Alito is now probably the furthest right judge you got.
Yeah.
Maybe you can argue Clarence Thomas, but I'll die on the hill that it's Alito.
Okay.
Ledbetter was a very poor woman. She grew up in a small town in Alabama, and she picked cotton before entering first grade.
Just classic.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I think her story is so great. She wasn't able to attend college, but she was convinced and had the conviction that she was going to get her kids to college and be able to save for retirement. She was going to have a better life. So she started working at Goodyear, where there were ads that women were going to start be adding to their management team. And she faced a lot of discrimination. At one point, she had to start bringing a gun to work because she was scared for her life.
Yeah.
Between the sexual harassment and everything. And while she was nearing her retirement, she found out that she was getting paid less than her male counterparts.
Yeah. There was a letter left for her, I think an anonymous letter, that listed her salary next to all of her male coworkers who were also managers at the same level as her and who had been hired around the same time as her. Mm-hmm. And it said something like she was making about $3,700 a month. Mm-hmm. And the men were making between $4,200 and $5,500 or something like that.
Yeah.
So just a blatant discrimination.
People with the same experience, the same job description, and they're making that much more than her.
Yeah.
Blatant discrimination. And so she files a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and is saying that Goodyear violated the Title VII clause of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Mm-hmm. The act says that the victim has to file a complaint within 180 days of an unlawful employment practice, and she showed that her case, that this was the case for her complaint, which will be important to remember. So after she gets that letter, she makes this complaint to the EEOC, and that all takes place within 180 days. A jury awarded her $3.5 million for the discrimination she faced. But then it goes to the Supreme Court. How does that go?
Unsurprisingly.
Unsurprisingly.
They rule 5-4 against Lily Ledbetter, and the decision is written by Sam Alito, and he says that because she didn't file the complaint within 180 days of the first paycheck that initiated the pay discrepancy, that she didn't deserve the payout from the court.
I don't understand why it has to be the first paycheck. It makes no sense to me.
No, it made absolutely no sense. And I mean, that's what the book said. And this is where, I mean, we've talked about this many times. I'll mention it again. This book has a clear liberal lean.
Yeah.
We look out for the bias here. So I feel like I've been extremely alert in trying to think like, okay, is there information they might be omitting here? Mm-hmm. To me, it's blatantly obvious that if she filed the complaint within 180 days of any paycheck where this discrepancy existed, she should be awarded the damages.
Totally.
But Alito just decided, and I think one of the liberals in dissent specifically said, like, this is a classic, it might have been RBG.
It was.
Like, this is a classic case of judicial lawmaking, of us completely stepping out of bounds. And I agree with that. And that's why the Lily Ledbetter Act, Fair Pay Act, was the first law that Obama signed when he got into office in 2008.
Yep. Ginsburg says, fix this legislatively. Obama comes in and he does it. It's the first law he signs. So that was really cool to see. But now we're going to go back in time and talk about how it wasn't always this bad.
True.
And see how some of the good things that came out of the 60s under the Warren Court.
Yes.
Okay. So the strength of the Title VII was unknown after 1964. And because it had some kind of vague language, and the vague language was kind of on purpose because it wanted to be almost as powerful as possible. Like in a lot of ways, you want it to be fairly vague so that administrators can take it upon themselves to enforce the intent and the passion behind the words as much as the words themselves.
But now what we're seeing, and I know you're going to make a point, but what we're seeing is how dangerous it actually is to be vague because of the amount of power it leaves to what is clearly a partisan court.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. I think during my time in Brookline politics, we were trying to pass a bill that had some fairly vague language, and the pushback was that it needed to be more narrower in scope and more defined. And my push was I wanted it to be more vague so that the administration and the department had more leeway to take action on things that have similar scopes, but things I didn't think about at the time.
Yeah.
But there is faults in that when you have a rogue court.
It feels like it's a really weird tension for liberals particularly, who want to give the government more leeway to have more power.
Yeah.
And you do that by writing more vague laws. But if you also have to worry in the back of your head about a conservative court who's just looking to manipulate your language into something that you totally didn't mean, you kind of get stuck.
I mean, it makes it hard because it doesn't, like if you were to take just what the people who wrote the legislation meant, it would be easy. But that's not what's happening.
No.
They're not taking what the people who wrote the legislation meant, right? So...
Yeah. Well, because I think there's no consensus on whether to make decisions by letter of the law or by spirit of the law.
Right.
Right. And it seems like you should always be trying to discern what the spirit of the law is and make the decision based on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we have... more civil rights cases coming in through the 1960s. And the first one we're going to talk about is Duke Power in North Carolina. Duke Power in North Carolina favored whites when hiring for employing a test that whites were more likely to pass. So this case was between Duke and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and it came to the conservative court in the 1970s. Again, this is coming to the conservative court in the 1970s.
Yeah, so after Warren had retired.
Post-Warren, now we're in the Burger Court with the Nixon court. Lawyers argued that even if an employer did not directly discriminate, if it adopted selection criteria that disadvantaged a protected group, and the criteria was unrelated to the job, then it should count as discrimination.
As a violation of the Title VII clause or whatever in the Civil Rights Act.
Yes. So the court ruled in favor of Griggs unanimously.
On the conservative court.
Unanimously on the conservative court. The Nixon-appointed conservative court was in favor of this unanimously.
Yeah.
And declared that Title VII barred not only overt discrimination, but also practices that are fair in form but discriminatory in practices that are fair in form but discriminatory in operation.
Yes.
The language discriminatory in operation, I think, that has so much power behind it.
Yeah.
Right? If you think about things that are discriminatory in operation, that's school funding, right? That's discriminatory in operation. The way the police departments are deployed, that's discriminatory in operation. And that admittance from a conservative court and that level of understanding of racial issues from a conservative court in the 1970s was really shocking for me to read.
Yeah, it was huge. And at this point, what was big is it set a precedent in future cases that defendants, companies, would have to prove that any job requirements they had were not, did not discriminate by the status of any protected group, and they were necessarily relevant to the job.
Them having to prove business necessity is vital here because it puts the burden on the business to now be more careful about it.
Yeah.
Because if it goes to court, it's on them. And that's what makes this really impactful. The New York Times at the time called this case a powerful engine of demographic change in the workplace.
It led to something, they called it a Griggs revolution because all across workplaces, companies didn't want to get taken to court. They saw that they were going to have to pay dues. And so they proactively started checking what their hiring practices looked like, making sure they removed anything that wasn't directly relevant to the job, removed anything that discriminated. That was immensely powerful. And it just goes, again, to show the power of the court.
Right.
To see how these laws are actually going to be enforced.
Right. And this was a good example of like Title VII, the vagueness of Title VII actually being used for the purpose of the spirit of the law.
Yes.
Right? Because when it says demographic by what does it say? Discriminatory in operation. That's not discriminatory in language. That's the opposite of letter of the law.
Yeah.
Right? It's the opposite of letter of policy.
Yes.
It's the implementation of the policy and the effects of it.
Totally.
So now we have another case. In the final months of the Berger era, 1986, we have Meritor Savings Bank versus Vincent. This was a young black employee said that she had been coerced by her supervisor into having sex repeatedly over several years with the fear of losing her job. Believe it or not, I guess that was not technically legal before the Civil Rights Act, which is insane.
That is insane.
So she rules for Title VII that this is a break in that, and the court ruled that sexual harassment now violated Title VII. In Title VII, doesn't say that sexual harassment is a violation.
No.
They've added that because of the spirit of Title VII.
Yes, because women are a protected group under the Civil Rights Act, and it's obvious that part of the spirit of that law would be to protect that protected group from sexual harassment, a form of discrimination in the workplace.
And again, 1986, conservative court, they are totally accepting the premise that you have to read past the lines and see the spirit of the law.
Yeah.
Which is something that conservatives nowadays do not say that they talk about.
They can do it if it's in their interests.
Right. They'll do it if they're in their interest. But if not, a conservative will never say that they're reading in between any lines. Exactly. They'll never say that.
Yeah.
So now in 1989, we have the shift. We have a shift from a conservative court to a very conservative court. And then eventually with Roberts, we'll have a hyper-conservative court. But right now we're in the conservative court era. 1989, the Rehnquist court comes in and he changes direction. Where do we go from there?
Ward's Cove Packing Co. versus Atonio. So this regards a salmon cannery business in Alaska. Okay. The problem here was that it filled its worst positions almost entirely with Filipinos and Native Americans in Alaska, while the better jobs were almost exclusively held by whites. So these people in the worst positions they sued and they said, there are these business practices that are violating Title VII. There are different hiring tracks for the two types of jobs, and there is a policy of not promoting from within. seems pretty fishy, right? It seems like you're really trying to keep them out.
Is that a pun? Because we're talking about a salmon
Not intended.
case?
Not
Okay,
intended.
okay.
It seems like the plaintiffs had a really good case, but the court rules 5-4 against them. And it specifically reversed the ruling from Griggs, which said the burden of proof lies on the corporation to say that these hiring practices are necessary to the business and that they're non-discriminatory. It said that no, now the burden of proof has to be on the employees, and that they have to show that the practices have a disparate impact on the protected group and that those practices were not necessary for the job. And
so
that's a huge deal.
Yeah, this is changing the balance of power, because before it was like actually giving power to the workers because you're putting more fear in the business side of getting sued. Now the worker sees this massive uphill battle to get what they should get the treatment that they deserve.
Yeah.
Because now they not only have to go to the court and prove that they're getting discriminated against, they have to go to the court and prove the explicit way in which they're getting discriminated against. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Blackman, who wrote the dissent in the case, he says that this calls into question whether the majority still believes that race discrimination, or more accurately, race discrimination against non-whites, is a problem in our society, or even remembers that it ever was. And this is scathing. I mean, this is going down to the point of like, this is again talking like we talked about last week, when did Reconstruction end? When did, America turn the corner on racism, and how we turned the corner? And some members of our society think we turned the corner and walked away from it a long time ago. Others think that we never needed to turn a corner in the first place. And people like that have gone to positions of power, and now they don't want to take any more steps to alleviate racial traumas of the past.
Yeah. Which is simply the wrong view, as racism continues to exist, and it's a problem that the government does need to address.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It reminds me of I think this is from the initial Civil Rights Act, or it might be from a case before the act came out. In one of the earlier chapters we were reading, it talks about how protected groups are given special consideration in cases. And there's an enormous burden of proof that lies on any defendant who's being prosecuted for having some sort of discriminatory practice in place.
Right.
And it's kind of stark to me, especially because this also deals with protected groups, that it gets rid of that, or it's directly contradictory to that like special scrutiny that had been placed on businesses, organizations for discriminating. This is just allowing it to happen.
Something about these hiring tests are above the necessity of that burden of proof.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't get that.
I don't get it at all. And in the same month, so now the Griggs test is gone here. And in the same month, the court would limit the impact of Section 1981 of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Only apply to discrimination in hiring, not discrimination on the job.
Which again makes no sense.
No sense to me. No sense to me.
Okay.
I don't. So then we have another case, back to back. We have Birmingham, Alabama, would make it easier for whites to bring cases against affirmative action, trying to get rid of affirmative action back in the 1980s right now, or early 1990s. And like the court was running rampant here. We're going against the Civil Rights Act of 1866. We're going against affirmative action. We're limiting the Griggs Act, or the Griggs, what is it? The Griggs test?
Yeah.
So Congress steps up, and they're trying to undo the damage that the courts did. And on November 21st, 1991, President George H.W. Bush signed the Civil Rights Act of 1991, restoring the Griggs test.
Yeah, and this passed enormously in the Senate.
93-5.
Yeah, in the Senate. Crazy.
So this shows that it was really almost bipartisan to be against these court decisions.
Yeah. And
they were angry at the court going so highly and vehemently against the spirit of the laws that they passed. And they rebuked it. And after this just decimation of the Rehnquist court, the court took a break from discrimination employment cases. but will return when Alito comes. And that's where the shift really comes with Alito. And but I think this was Rehnquist getting a little bit too big for his britches here. I mean, this was him just taking everything he could just so fast that it was even too much for the conservatives to palate.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, Rehnquist does strike me as that kind of character. The book doesn't talk about it much, but I can see that. Yeah.
So now we'll move on to age discrimination. Yeah. And this one's a little hard for me.
Really?
I think so. I'm curious about your takes on a couple of these cases. But so in 2009, what were we going to say something? No?
Go ahead.
2009, Jack Gross case is going to the Supreme Court. So Jack Gross, he grew up in one of Iowa's poorest counties. He developed chronic ulcerated colitis. I'm not a doctor. And was in constant pain since the age of 5. So he's had a pretty hard life. After a lot of work at a company, working there for a long, long time, he was demoted on the same day and replaced by a younger person alongside a bunch of his other older coworkers. It was really like a whole change of the guard. All the old people got demoted, all the young people got promoted.
And he learned that soon after that it was the result of a merger that the company had just gone through.
That's right.
So the new management came in and they wanted to change things up.
Yeah. And he sued under the Age Discrimination Act and Employment Act of 1967, and a jury awarded him $45,000. Eighth Circuit Court ended up overturning this ruling, and then he took it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled against Gross 5-4, and Clarence Thomas said that you had to prove that age was not just one factor, but the only factor for being negatively affected. The only factor? How could you ever identify the single factor?
Yeah, that's why I think this is like my take on this case is it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I think it once again seems like kind of a crusade on the part of the court, and they talk about Clarence Thomas in some depth after that in this chapter, and it definitely supports that. I thought that part was extremely interesting.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting too.
Yeah.
And Gross said in response, he felt like he felt like his case was hijacked and the court rewrote the law.
Yeah. Well, and I think also it's because the language in the age discrimination law was exactly the same as the language in the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
That prevented discrimination by age or discrimination by a protected group. And never was there a decision on the basis of the Civil Rights Act that said anything like your race or your gender has to be the only thing that led to the discrimination.
How are you even going about proving that?
Like, you have to go through every other possibility and say it couldn't have been. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. My issue with this case, though, comes when we talk about age limits for elected officials. Because I think I am of the opinion that if you're over the age of 75, you should either not be allowed to go for office because you're too old, or you should have to take a test to prove that you're still capable.
I'm not opposed to that.
But does that go against this? Because aren't we discriminating based off age now? So that's why I find difficulty in this whole thing of discriminatory on age, because I'm definitely in favor of some type of regulation of public officials having...
Well, I think the difference is that there was no decline in Jack Gross's performance. And I think they specifically mentioned that in the book.
Okay, yeah.
His performance was still up to snuff. So I think having something like a test, and I mean, to me, in politics, I feel like I would be up for a test of everyone.
Yeah.
Like, why limit it if the I don't know, if the 33-year-old can't pass a basic test that they're trying to give people to kind of gatekeep them from coming into the government, why should they be able to? I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I think everyone should have to pass the citizenship test before you run for office.
I don't know if I could pass.
I think we could, dude.
Really?
Actually, I think we could.
I mean, I haven't read it. All I know is I think it probably goes... I mean, I think you could, because it's all about history.
Yeah.
I think it probably goes too deep into history for me to know.
Okay.
I don't know. I think maybe 10% of American citizens could pass it.
I would be so curious to find out what percent of American citizens could pass that test.
I think it would be so low.
That's so depressing.
Well, we're about to talk about immigration in our deep dive, so we'll get into that.
We'll get into that. So now we're going into the Roberts era here. We're almost there. 2011, court limited the ability of workers to bring large class action lawsuits. This is another one that I don't understand, actually.
Okay, so this is one where I was reading it. I'm like, I don't have time to go into it. I don't know what the rules on class action are exactly, and I feel like the book was a little vague about that. So maybe there's more reason for it. But you should go ahead and describe what happened.
Yeah, right. Like maybe class action means something different than what I think it means, because the book's framing is so obviously trying to put a layup here.
Yeah.
So we could spike it down and say, look how bad conservatives are.
I think so. Maybe.
Right. So plaintiffs are suing Walmart for sex discrimination on behalf of 1.5 million current or former female employees. The court rules 5-4 and held that the case could not proceed as class action because all women had to show that they faced the same injury, and only employees with the same supervisor would be able to do that.
See, I will say that's where I become skeptical even of my initial skepticism, because why is having the same supervisor more telling than being employed by the same company?
I don't know. I can understand them saying they need to face the same injury for a class action. I can understand that part.
Sure.
I don't understand the same supervisor language at all.
Exactly.
I don't understand that at all, because are they saying that the supervisor is the one you're interacting with the most? And so those are the people who are directly impacting your day-to-day work activities?
I would assume so.
Like, I just don't understand that, though, because Walmart is still the corporation that hired the supervisor.
Sure.
All of the supervisors.
Yes.
So I don't understand.
Yeah, it does seem like Walmart should, as a single entity, be responsible for the mistreatment of the workers.
Yeah. And so they take down these abilities for workers to file these class action lawsuits.
Yeah. And I'll just say here, and Cohen's been making the point over the course of all of these, that more than just the decisions that are made, a huge part of the impact is just how much harder it makes it to bring any of these lawsuits for employees going forward.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're risking losing a job, you're risking a lot of legal fees, and with these decisions, it becomes so much less likely that you're going to win and actually be awarded damages, that companies are basically given the green light to have more discriminatory practices.
Right. Because again, it's putting the burden on the plaintiff. It's putting the burden on the worker. And the worker doesn't have the capital to go through all the legal fees that the corporation will. So they're less inclined to do it, right?
Exactly.
So now, 2013, the court made it harder to sue for on-the-job harassment. Again, we're saying it's making it harder. Yeah. We have Matea Vance. She was a black woman who had been sexually assaulted while working at Ball State University in Indiana. Her white boss was mean and would hit her and torment her with racial harassment. Colleagues boasted that they had family members in the KKK with her, and the court ruled against Vance. Alito wrote the opinion, 5-4, obviously, and Alito wrote that the specialist who was abusive did not qualify as her supervisor.
Yeah.
Only those with hiring or firing powers were managers, not those giving out tasks.
So this one is interesting to me.
Okay.
Because first of all, say Alito's right. Say or let's not care about the particular point Alito is on. Should companies have some responsibility for treatment of coworkers to each other? Right? To me, it does make a little bit of sense that the act initially limited the responsibility of corporations to be the treatment of a superior to an employee.
Yeah.
But it's hard to ensure, it's really hard, I think, to put that on a company, to make sure that none of its coworkers are bullying the others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, bullying is bullying different from racial harassment?
I don't know.
Yeah. I think I would say it is, because I would say that it is. And the company, I think, should be responsible of punishing the worker who is being racially discriminatory.
Okay.
And then if they're not punishing that worker, then they'll have to be problems. So I think like it would have to. I think you would have to take the case to the company and say, this coworker of mine is racially harassing me, and I want you to take some type of action against it. And then if they say no, then there's a problem. I think they should be enforced by the law to take some type of action.
Okay.
Some type of action.
Bullying is definitely where it gets hard. It's where it gets murky as far as it is, like it's speech. I mean, for me, the testimony that she hit Matea Vance.
Right. And that seems obvious.
Yeah. Like in that case, maybe could she have, or did she? Okay. So talking about the court's anti-union stances throughout the years.
Yeah.
So the book talks about the history of unions. At the very beginning, how anti-union corporations and the government were, even to the point that he brings up the Ludlow Massacre, which saw 20 oil workers, I think, and their families killed because they were on strike. And violence against union workers was common. Yeah.
I mean, we talk about in the 1920s, we have the Battle of Blair Mountain in West Virginia. It's a coal strike, coal miners. And it was the first time that the United States used its Air Force to drop bombs on ground targets. And it was American citizens.
That's wild.
That was the first time, the Battle of Blair Mountain. So being anti-union is built into the American government and corporation systems. But there was some real movement towards collective bargaining power in the 30s with the New Deal, and specifically the passage of the National Labor Relations Act. It recognized the right to collectively bargain, and management and labor was now supposed to negotiate in good faith with one another. And it's being mandated by law, which is a real positive step for union power.
Absolutely.
It doesn't last very long. 1947, after World War II, we saw the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act, and this banned certain types of strikes and pickets, but it didn't totally decimate workers immediately and the unions immediately. So in 1949, 35% of private sector workers were in a union. Today, that number is 6%.
Yeah. And one of the big ways that that's been enabled is through right-to-work laws, which was also a result of the Taft-Hartley Act. And this basically means that workers are allowed to opt in to paying their union dues. And the thinking here goes that a lot of workers are not going to voluntarily opt into paying dues, which is going to weaken unions. And so they're going to basically sit back and enjoy the protection that the union gives them without contributing their fair share. The problem, of course, being that the unions are going to have less power to protect them, the less money that they get from the dues.
It's like the ultimate free rider problem, right? They're getting all the benefits but don't want to pay for it. And now unions aren't able to demand to pay for it. But during the 30s, we still had some positive movements in workers' favor. One example of this, in 1938, the court wrote the McKay Doctrine. This court order said that companies. This is an anti-union thing in the 30s. In the McKay Doctrine, the court ordered that companies could fill the position of striking workers with permanent replacements.
Yeah.
And this court also struck down many other New Deal programs on top of that. And the court and FDR have very famous hatred towards one another.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, FDR threatened to pack the court if they don't decide on the things that he said. He's like, if you don't decide this way, I'm going to pack the court with people who are loyal to me.
Wow.
He said that verbatim.
That's
why he was the best president.
Sounds like FDR.
That's why he was the best president.
Yeah.
He was like, if you don't do what I want, I will find people who will do what I want, and you will become irrelevant.
It is funny that you're saying he was the best president because of the dictatorial like power that he threatened to use. Like, I will enact my will regardless.
Yeah.
It
depends whose will he's trying to enact.
Exactly.
If it's the workers' will, then I'm okay with that.
So McKay Doctrine, this really was a massive blow to the NLRA, because it had specifically set out, again, this is spirit of the law. It specifically set out to protect union workers, including if they went on strike.
Right.
And so the way they got around this is, okay, it's not that you can fire the union workers on strike. It's just that you can fill their positions, which obviously means that once they're off strike, they're going to be fired anyways.
Right. It's like you have the right to collectively bargain, but the right to collectively bargain is really only as strong as your right to strike. In the United States, we don't have a written right to strike. Other nations do. France has a right to strike. If I was ever in federal office, one of my first things would be fighting for a right to strike. But
wow,
right now, we don't. Why are you saying wow?
Just that was like the first message of your presidential campaign.
Yeah. Workers have the right to strike. That's issue number one. Second, take down the McKay Doctrine.
Yeah.
The Warren Court reverses this trend and kind of is the court FDR should have had.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Could you imagine a different alternative universe where FDR had the Warren Court by his side?
That would be insane.
Insane. Could have had socialism in America. It's a joke, people. It's a joke. In a case from Massachusetts, the court held that an employer could not threaten its workers with losing their job if they wanted to join a union. That's huge. That's huge. We see that today, that corporations are still firing workers for trying to join unions. Starbucks, yeah. Amazon. Starbucks had like a lot of shops unionized, and I think they shut down the shops that unionized. So, they still find a ways around it, but this is good that the court is going in this direction. But after Nixon, the attacks continue. What's the first one you have?
I have Reagan firing 11,000 striking air traffic controllers who are in a union, which is credited with drastically reducing the number of strikes that happen from then on out.
Yeah, it was like, how many people did he fire with that?
11,000.
11,000, yeah.
That's wild.
It's wild to me that he was able to win the union vote after that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. How was he able to have union bona fides after doing something like that?
That, once again, it screams voter ignorance to me.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't understand. So when Nixon comes to power, we have more things going on in okay, let's go here. Attacks continue after Nixon. We're going to skip over to 1992.
Okay.
All right. Union organizers wanted to access the workplaces to speak to employees. Now, this is huge. I've talked to a lot of people who organize unions for a living, who spend their time trying to educate workers on the way to organize and the right steps to take. And this store, Leshmere, threatened to get all organizers arrested for trespassing if their union literature made it into their mall. But not just into their mall, in the parking lot of the mall.
Yeah, the union organizers wanted to put flyers on the cars of employees to inform them about what was happening.
And that was, that's the only way you're going to be able to reach all the employees, right? So Clarence Thomas, obviously they decided against the union workers, and they said that you need their permission and that it was trespassing. And Clarence Thomas wrote that Leshmere could keep the union out of the parking lot. Thomas, and then this is when we get into the background of Clarence Thomas, and you can go into it since you were so excited.
I hope that I can say this well enough. Basically, Thomas grew up dirt poor himself. He grew up with an abusive grandfather because his father was out of the picture. Ended up going to Yale Law School, and somehow his growing up with the poor actually made him more venomous towards them as a justice. The book points out how he is the most cruel justice to the weak, and it also talks about how. So during his confirmation, a piece of news came out where I think Anita White was her name.
Anita Hill.
Anita Hill accused him of sexual assault in high school, which of course Thomas denies. And it made it so that his Senate confirmation vote was the closest that there had maybe ever been, or had been in like 100 years or something. Mm-hmm. It was 52 to 48. The book cites confidants of Clarence Thomas that had been reported on afterwards, and how they said that the closeness of that vote kind of embittered him, and made it so that he wanted to get back at the liberals. And there's some quote specifically saying, like, I'm going to live long enough, I'm going to vote in enough of these decisions that I'm going to make them regret that this is what happened. And this was kind of his first step in doing so. And since then, he has arguably been the most conservative justice on the court. Still there today.
Still there today. Joe Biden actually ran the hearing, the Anita Hill hearings.
Really?
He was the chair of the Judiciary Committee when Clarence Thomas was getting appointed.
Wow.
And he ran the Anita Hill meeting. From the progressive perspective, he wasn't hard enough on Thomas. From the conservative perspective, he was too hard on Thomas, obviously.
Shocker.
Right.
Sounds like the story of Joe Biden's life.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. One other small tidbit about Clarence Thomas to really show the type of man he is. His sister was very poor. Is very poor, and he said about his sister that she gets mad when the mailman is late with her welfare check. And this is the type of guy who's basically writing the laws that affect all of us. Yeah. A guy who is that unsympathetic to even his own sister.
Yeah, and who's receiving gifts from billionaires to fund his own life.
Yeah, please. Oh, God. Fucking bite me.
Yeah.
So now we'll get into the attacks on public sector unions from the court.
Yeah.
Public sector unions are pretty important in American politics. They are overwhelmingly in favor of Democratic candidates. They are some of the most consistent donor bases of Democratic candidates, even the workers in public sector unions. So it's an important. It's a partisan attack against these unions as much as it is an attack on unions themselves ideologically.
Yes.
This is also about weakening the Democratic Party in a way. So 1977, the Burger Court, Abbott v. Detroit Board of Education, we have some school teachers arguing that their unions were using their dues to promote political causes or religious causes that they did not agree with and wanted to not be forced to give these unions the money. The Abbott Court ruled that the money given to the unions could only be used for collective bargaining purposes and nothing more. I agree with that.
Yeah, it was kind of a compromise because the justices agreed, they conceded that unions shouldn't be able to spend money towards causes that the employees who are paying their dues might not agree with. So they're saying, okay, but they also see how much unions would lose power if workers weren't required to pay their dues. So they're like, let's strike a compromise.
Right, and I think that's the perfect compromise. I don't think that public sector unions should really be in the politics of spending their money outside of collective bargaining anyway.
I agree.
I think they should be focused on organizing collective bargaining stuff. So I don't really disagree with that opinion. So now 2011, states with Republican governors scale back the rights of unions. So think about what's going on in 2011. Obama was elected in 2008. 2010 was the massive Republican wave. Just like 60 plus seats in 2010.
Was it? I thought
Massive.
What the book said is that the Democrats overperformed.
In 2010?
So that's what I thought it said.
No.
Because that's why it said the idea was that Republican governors were almost taking revenge with increasing right to work laws.
Oh, no. 2010 was the worst decimation of the Democratic Party.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the absolute worst. I mean, we're talking 60 plus seats in the House gone.
Wow.
Yeah, we're talking more governor mansions flipped, I think, in any other year ever. Like it was one of the worst elections for an in-party party in power. Actually, now that you got me curious, I'm going to look up the 2010 election results generic ballot. I want to see how much it was here. So it was a 10-point lead. The Republican won the overall vote by 10 points in 2010 across the country.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the rise of, honestly, like the modern Tea Party movement was 2010. So states that were Democrat for a long time, specifically Wisconsin, started, even states like Wisconsin elected Republican governors. And so this is when right to work laws really started exploding. And Scott Walker from Wisconsin gets to power, and he limits the ability of unions representing government workers to engage in collective bargaining, period. Scott Walker is one of these guys who's really ideological, and he was the darling of the Republican Party in this 2010 to 2018 era. Like, he was the man. To be honest with you, Scott Walker is take Scott Walker out and put in Ron DeSantis, and they're playing the same role.
Okay.
And honestly, it's playing out even more like a rhyming poem, because Scott Walker, when he ran for president, was supposed to be the front runner and then got decimated. And it looked, and Ron DeSantis was propped up, supposed to be the front runner, and apparently he's getting decimated. So the Scott Walker, Ron DeSantis parallels are insane.
Interesting.
But Scott Walker gets to power in Wisconsin, limits the rights of public sector unions for collective bargaining. 2012, Indiana is adopting right-to-work legislation. And then we have cases coming up that are challenging how agency fees are calculated. Agency fees are those union dues that public sector workers pay, right? Alito suggests that the concept of a mandatory agent fee could be up for grabs. He doesn't go in so far to say as we need to eliminate the agency fee entirely, but Alito is opening up the door. And when this case was supposed to go to the court and be heard, Scalia died, meaning that the court was now a 4-4 court. Obama was president at the time, but he didn't have control of the Senate. So he nominates Merrick Garland, and the Republican machine went into overdrive to stop this nomination and never held a vote. Republicans held the seat open until Trump appointed Neil Gorsuch, and the conservative court was held together through lies, deception, and
the filibuster.
The
threat of the filibuster, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so once Gorsuch is confirmed, Janus v. American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees comes along, and the court has the conservative majority it needs to eliminate required public union fees.
Entirely gone.
Yeah.
Workers could now opt out of these fees and leave the unions poorer, smaller, and less able to advocate for their members.
Yeah.
After Michigan passed similar legislation to this, they saw a decrease of 28% of their agency fees being paid to them.
Yeah, there was decreases in government employee employment across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is just areas where the public sector unions are just getting decimated, and the balance of power has completely shifted by this point to the hands of the corporations entirely.
Yeah, and that's kind of the next part of this chapter. Is it honestly, I don't want to spend too long on it, because we already talked about how the court has given corporations more power, and it references Buckley v. Vallejo, which is a case we talked about in a prior episode, which has allowed unlimited spending from corporations. And so corporations now consistently outspend unions significantly in elections. In 1978, unions outspent corporations. Now corporations spend about 7 times as much as unions in elections. But there haven't been, the book didn't talk about any cases that happened with this. It was just because of something the court did in the past.
This is what's happening now.
Yeah.
And right to work laws are springing up all over the place. This is the main goal. But when right to work gets on the ballot, it doesn't win very often. Missouri was a good example of this. Missouri, not a liberal state, put a right to work piece of legislation on as a referendum on the ballot, and Missouri voters overturned the law from a 2-1 margin.
Yeah.
And in most cases, union membership will drop 5 to 10% after a right to work law is passed in a state. So it really will decimate it. He goes on to talk about the minimum wage. We all are, I feel like we've talked about the minimum wage a lot, but
totally.
Yeah. So France's minimum wage is 60.5% the median wage. The US is only 35. He suggests that the reason that the minimum wage is what it is because of
corporate power that the court has given over the years.
And the way that corporations are able to give money to candidates.
Exactly.
How do you feel about that? I mean, I know you don't really... Do you think it's tied? I think the minimum wages is weakest, but you think it's totally tied?
I actually do. I mean, again, if I'm thinking that policy tends to follow the money, there have been several polls that say that a majority of Americans are in favor of raising the minimum wage. And I feel like in a lot of these red states, it might even be it might be more helpful. So to me, this is corporate greed getting in the way.
In 2020, Trump wins Florida, but a referendum to raise the minimum wage to $15 won. across the state.
Yeah.
You know? So, and I guess that kind of is the end of this chapter for me.
Yeah, same here. I just found this 62% of U.S. adults don't just say they favor raising the federal minimum wage. They say that they favor raising it to $15 an hour.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And there isn't even a movement in Congress to even touch that, really.
No, I mean, I hear Bernie talking about it.
Of course, you hear Bernie talking about it. You'll hear Warren talking about it, Ed Markey talking about it, but not enough, ever.
No.
So that's the next chapter of Supreme Inequality down. I don't know what the next week's one. Be on your toes.
Yeah, should be exciting.
Yeah, should be exciting as always. Just a little depressing.
Just a little.
But now it's time for the meat.
For the deep dive.
The deep dive.
Doing immigration today, which I'm very excited about. I think we should start with laying out what current immigration policy is, and then maybe current rhetoric, and then we get into our ideas.
I love it.
So, current immigration policy, so the main way that people immigrate here is with a green card, okay? There are a few different ways to get a green card. The most popular one is by having a relative in the United States. That is enough to get you a green card to come here. Another one is a relative who is a United States citizen and in the United States, I believe. Another one is by having or being highly skilled in some sector, some industry, and so we will give green cards to people with skills that we value, who we want as part of the economy. Besides that, there is a lottery, which allows, I think, somewhere in the tens of thousands of people in every year. That lottery has millions of people apply. You have a very low likelihood of getting in, but it goes to people from countries who are not members of the biggest immigrant countries into the U.S. So it's not people from Mexico. It's often people from sub-Saharan African countries who come here via that lottery.
Okay.
That is it. And a major point that I'm going to make right now is that a low-skilled worker without family in America is very clearly not represented by any of those options.
He's not given an option, right? He has no way in. No way in.
Exactly.
And that is encouraging illegal immigration.
Totally.
Because without giving them an option to get into the country or a path to do it, America is the land of opportunity. He's going to find his way in because he knows that his life here is going to be better than wherever he's coming from. And he's going to do whatever he can to get here. And that's encouraging more illegal immigration by not giving them that legal path.
Exactly.
And I think it's important that we grease the wheels to make it as easy as possible. Yeah. From my perspective, I think it's important to grease the wheels to make it as easy as possible for people to get into the country.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to deal with an illegal immigrant problem. We can just have immigrants. It won't be a problem anymore.
Exactly.
And so then that's when this gets more into why should we have immigration? Why shouldn't we have immigration?
Yeah, and honestly, I actually think it's better that we talk about why we should.
Okay.
First, I think that makes more sense.
Okay.
So there are plenty of reasons. I think the most obvious argument against I could think about would be that immigrants take Americans' jobs, right? And so because of that, you would expect to see job losses for natives, and you would expect to see wage decreases for natives because there are more people competing with those jobs. But the truth is, at least based on a paper that I read from the National Bureau of Economic Research, that more illegal immigrants, first of all, more illegal immigrants is better for lower skilled workers.
More legal?
Illegal.
Okay.
So we'll start with illegal.
Yeah.
Then we'll talk about legalization.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because first of all, it creates more jobs by ramping up production.
Exactly.
And they're not actually competing with the native population for the jobs.
Right. They're competing for two totally separate jobs.
Exactly. So these illegal immigrants they're working in farm jobs. They're working in construction. And they're being paid wages that are often so low that natives don't want to take them. And so it allows corporations to work in this gray zone where they don't even have to pay a minimum wage, or at least a fair market wage for these illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
But they still get the production, which is going to create higher level jobs for natives.
And if you're concerned about illegal immigrants bringing down wages, you don't want the illegal immigrant to be able to operate under the table like this.
Yeah.
You would want them to have to compete on the same minimum wage front as you, right?
Exactly.
Because you don't want to have to compete with a guy who's going to take $4 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to have to compete with that.
Yes.
And so that's where, fixing this immigration problem is so important, right? Mm-hmm. So I have read papers that suggest that the initial wage shock could be present.
Yeah.
With new workers, just an initial wave shock. But over time, firms will increase investment due to the expanded economic demand that's coming from these illegal immigrants who now have capital to spend in the American economy.
Yeah.
Right? Something I was looking at was talking about the log capital labor, the capital labor ratio. And the capital labor ratio is always reverting back to this 1940, 1980 trend. And it's like a law of economics where you're going to have this, when you increase the amount of workers, you're also increasing the amount of capital that can go into reinvesting because you're increasing the output completely.
Yep.
Right? So these wage problems aren't really that much of an issue. There are two big studies that are done on this. And one of them is from Octaviano and Perry. Their study showed that there are only positive impacts for Native workers among all education groups. Borjas disagreed slightly. Borjas is a very prominent immigration economist. He saw that there was a negative impact for non-educated Native workers of 1.7%. downward pressure on wages for non-high school educated workers. Non-high school educated Native workers are becoming more and more of a small population in the United States. So we're talking about a very, very minute amount of Native workers getting negatively impacted in their wages, also only by 1.7%.
Yeah, and this is disputed because I found a paper that said that it actually increases wages for lower skilled workers. So Borjas, I do know he is a reputed researcher in the field, but it's possible that immigration actually doesn't have any negative economic effects.
Right. It's possible it doesn't have any.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting that the range of studies I've seen have actually been like 1.7% positive impact for non-high school educated workers. And then Borjas finds a negative 1.7% impact for non-high school educated workers. If you average it out, it's zero, no impact. So I feel like that's kind of a good sentiment of where the research is currently at.
Yeah.
It's basically like inconclusive, really nothing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I read a study and I took poor notes on it, which is going to screw up this conversation. But it proposed three or four policies for dealing with illegal immigrants. And there were three that had to do with deportation, to do with letting them stay here illegally. And then the last one modeled legalizing all the immigrants currently in the country.
Yeah.
And that was the only policy option that raised wages for everyone, including the low-skilled Native workers. Because it's just like you said, you don't want to be competing with the person who can get paid less than you.
Yeah.
Right? And who will do the work happily because they're still getting paid less than they would get in their country.
Exactly.
So on the economic front, for me, at least...
we're only on the wages part.
True.
There are other aspects of the economy too.
True.
Right? So on the wages front, I think this is great news.
Yes.
Right?
Me too.
Now we can go to productivity.
Okay.
Productivity is the next topic of the economy. Of the top 50 venture capital firms, half of them had at least one immigrant founder, and 3/4 of them had immigrants as top management or research positions. Many STEM degrees that are being pursued in the United States currently are from foreign students. Native population in the United States right now is not pursuing STEM degrees in the ways that they should be. Foreign students are. They're coming to the United States to pursue these STEM degrees, and that's where the innovation and productivity comes from. And that's what grows the economy more than anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What I have immigrants represent 16% of inventors in the U.S., but produce 23% of the innovative output and 36% of aggregate innovation when accounting for spillover to natives, because that's a huge part of this too. Immigrants are bringing more ideas across our borders. They are the people responsible for the knowledge transfer that we benefit so much from.
Yeah.
So we want more of that, not less.
Yeah. And these immigrants are actually, I found, produce patents at double the rate as natives.
Yeah.
And so this is all areas where especially highly educated illegal immigrants are what we need to be sucking the world of right now. We need to be sucking these people in from everywhere. And I think getting into our geopolitical conversations with China, as we do all the time, we have a lot of Chinese foreign students that come in and study in the United States, but then have a hard time staying in the United States and have to go back to China. Why would we do that? Why would we educate these workers and then let them leave? We should educate them and then want to keep them here for as long as possible so that they can innovate here and make their patents here and be part of our economy and our community.
Exactly.
We should be in the business of that.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is states with higher concentrations of foreign-born workers actually experience faster rates of productivity growth. So for productivity, check. Immigrants are good. Wages, check / We're still pretty good.
Yeah.
Fiscal impact. So on a federal level, so fiscal impact, like budgetary stuff with governments, right? On a federal level, immigrants I have are positive.
I have that too.
But it can be different for state and local governments.
I have that too.
Okay.
Yeah. So for federal, because immigrants usually, and we talked about this a little bit before the episode, they're usually not the people who are a big burden on the entitlements programs like Social Security, Medicare, because immigrants tend to be younger people.
Right.
However, where they are costly is by educating their children.
Right.
So because they're usually...
Which they're likely to have more of the natives.
Yes. And they're usually, especially illegal immigrants, they're low-wage workers most of the time. So they're not paying as much into the system via taxes, and the system is spending a lot on educating their kids. I think that's all I have.
Okay. I have... Yeah. You pretty much nailed it. But I'll say like the proportion of the ages that are coming into the country through illegal means are non-citizens. We have 25% are between the ages of 25 and 34. We have about 25% between the ages of 35 and 44. So these are prime age workers, prime productivity workers, and prime consumers.
Yes.
That are coming here. Small amounts of children, 0 to 14. 0 to 14, we have 5% non-citizens.
Oh, that surprises me.
It surprises me, but I think that 25 and 34 having children will bump that up as the years go on. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But so from the perspective of benefit or impacts of Social Security, I've heard arguments that say that it will drain 1.7 trillion additional dollars from our government if we choose to let these illegal immigrants stay and fold in, become citizens. It'll cost $1.7 trillion. That number is very disputed. That's a really hard calculation to make. It takes a lot of assumptions, and I really only found it from one source, but that one source was published 5 times in 5 different websites.
Okay.
That's not stuff you want to see.
No.
You never want to see that.
Yeah, that sounds like they're plucking something that's going to get a lot of eyeballs.
And even when I looked at the math behind it, it didn't look good.
Okay.
It did not look good, but this is what he came to. I take issue with that because the people who will be paying in, so these 25 to 50-year-olds, which is basically where the immigrants are going to be paying into Social Security, but not really taking out of Social Security yet. And our issue with Social Security is that there are too many baby boomers going into retirement, and we don't have the necessary funds in our Social Security program to keep it totally solvent in the coming like 2 decades to its full degree. We should do a show on that sometime. But by legalizing these workers, we could have an influx of money going to these programs from people that aren't necessarily taking out yet. And by the time that these illegal immigrants gray out, retire, we will have a new generation of Americans ready to subsidize their retirement.
Yeah.
And so I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to fix our baby boomer retirement crisis by getting these people to pay into Social Security and Medicare now as much as possible.
Yeah, I think it works even more because of the demographic specifics that have gotten us into this this pickle with Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much all I have on the economy. But
no, that's pretty
the
much
overall big picture here, and anyone I think who's studied any economics and who has learned about demographics, I feel like this stuff has been all over the news recently, knows that people tend to be good for an economy.
Yeah, people are actually a good thing.
Yeah, you want producers and consumers.
Yeah.
Like, that kind of makes you grow. So the question, of course, with all these good things, even though we mentioned a few
I'm going to say one more good thing.
Okay.
One more good thing.
Yeah.
There's just a good case study here. When there was a massive influx of Cubans in southern Florida, massive influx. Like, we're talking counties that grew by like 10, 20% overnight with population. People were expecting an economic crisis. The place flourished like 2 years later. Like, flourished. A lot of economic growth, a lot of opportunity. And that's just a great showcase of how immigrants are good for an economy, not bad.
I like that.
So now, why do people hate immigrants?
And there's a list of reasons. One thing that immediately comes to my mind is, look at the strain on government resources because of what are happening in these cities, in these sanctuary cities. Look at what's happening in Chicago and how they're having to house all these immigrants in churches or in high schools. And they just weren't ready at all. I think it's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is not that we need to shut down immigration. It's that we need a better structure for legal immigration.
Definitely.
I think that's kind of my bottom line, and I'll come back to that with every complaint that there is. But if we made it easier for people to immigrate, made it legal for people to immigrate with low skills, right? Gave channels for companies to communicate to these potential labor markets that are outside the country, and made it straightforward for them to sign up and come. So one, it's going to be easier for the immigrants because they're not going to have to like treacherously cross their countries and try to cross the border and always fear deportation.
Or pay for a cartel to smuggle them through.
Exactly. Yeah. And cities, local governments won't have to spend a bunch of money putting them up because they'll know that these people are coming in with jobs. It solves all the problems there.
Yeah, it's about greasing the wheels to get them in here as smooth as possible.
Do you worry at all? One thing that I think about with that is, if these immigrants can't work for less than the minimum wage, will that ruin their employment prospects?
I don't know. But also, I don't know if I care. Okay. I don't know if I care about that. Because I can definitely concede that sometimes unionizing a specific workforce could actually make it more difficult to hire them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I'm going to be anti-union.
I'm not, I don't know. I go back and forth because I've also thought, I was thinking about this with globalization recently. So one of the reasons we talk about globalization, this is a tangent, is because all these jobs went overseas, these manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
Why did they go overseas? Because labor was cheaper there.
Yeah.
Right? One, means you can make the argument that those jobs would have stayed here without a minimum wage. Two, even if you say that, maybe it means that the jobs are necessarily going to the people who need them the most. They might not be going to Americans, but if we're taking this from a globalist perspective instead of a nationalist perspective, it might actually be a good thing. And that's why, globalization has brought millions, maybe probably billions out of poverty.
Well, that's why, that's like the Indian economic progress over the last decade. Just the last decade has been amazing because of the switch from people going from sustenance farming to industrial farming, or industrial farming / industrial labor, right? Yeah. That switch is so immeasurably powerful in raising your standard of living that globalization in a lot of these countries is the best thing for them.
Yeah.
And so us having, what are you suggesting?
I don't know if I'm suggesting a lower minimum wage or if I'm suggesting we're just okay with jobs leaving to globalization. I mean, no member of the U.S. government, I guess, should be, because they're here to represent U.S. citizens, and those jobs going to other countries are specifically hurting U.S. citizens. But in that case, like, it seems that lowering the minimum wage might be smarter because it would incentivize more jobs to be here.
I feel like that would hurt the standard of living for Americans, though. Obviously.
Yes, I think so too. And the thing is, there's been other literature that raising the minimum wage actually wouldn't raise unemployment.
Yeah. We should do a deep dive on that too. There's plenty of studies that show that minimum wage increases, if done correctly, have no impacts on employment at all.
Yeah. But I don't know. Bringing it back to immigration, right?
I think there is no way that you could lower the American minimum wage that would make it acceptable to an American. You can't equal the labor cost of a Mexican laborer and an American laborer that American will be able to keep up with living in the U.S. economy.
I think
there's no way to do that.
Yeah, I think that's true. Even if the minimum wage is, say it's raised, say it goes to $15. And I think these companies are more likely to get Mexican immigrants to work the farms for $15 an hour than they are to get Native American citizens.
Yes, I agree. But and a lot of Americans blame illegal immigrants for taking their jobs and lowering their wages, but that's just not what we see.
Yeah, the data doesn't support it.
So right now, I think the big one is crime. A lot of people blame illegal immigrants for American crime. Mm-hmm. And the data I've seen just does not show that at all. So the first thing I read was the study from the Marshall Project. It was a fairly back-of-the-hand calculation that I didn't really agree with the total of the methodology, but it paints an all right picture. It shows trends from 2007 to 2016 with their plotting the amount of illegal immigrants in the area and crime. And they find that even though illegal immigrants are increasing in all of these areas, crime is not necessarily increasing alongside it. There's actually a slight decrease. There could be a ton of reasons why they're decreasing, though, and they don't account for those. They don't account for maybe these cities are in blue districts or red districts. They don't account for guns per capita. They're not accounting for a lot of things. They're not accounting for education spending per capita. They're only accounting for immigrants. So I don't agree with that formulation at all, but it at least paints the general picture that crime is not exploding because of illegal immigrants. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I found a paper on illegal immigration and crime in Texas.
Is this from the Cato Institute?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. We've read the same one.
Yeah. So the results that they have here is that actually native-born Americans commit more crimes by far than any types of immigrants.
By far.
1,422 crimes per 100,000 native-born Americans versus 782 for illegal immigrants versus 535 for legal immigrants.
So our country would be safer full of illegal immigrants than native-born Americans, right?
Yeah, which honestly, probably not that surprising.
Yeah.
And also, I could imagine an immediate reaction to that number being like, oh, well, illegal immigrants are committing more violent crimes. But no, they thought about that, and this pattern holds for all specific types of crimes: violent crimes, property crimes, homicide, sex crimes. It is always native-born Americans commit the most, then illegal immigrants, then legal immigrants.
And I just think and one of the reasons, obviously, is illegal immigrants have way more to lose if they get caught doing anything.
Yeah.
Because they'll be threatened with deportation, right? Mm-hmm. So that makes a lot of sense while they're less.
Yeah.
And for legal immigrants, I feel like legal immigrants will feel as though they have something to prove in their community, as that they belong and that they're able to assimilate. Mm-hmm. And so there's a pressure for them to not commit crimes. I just think it's insane that this can exist. And then we can also have a news media that is talking to so much of our population, pushing down their throats that illegal immigrants are the cause of all these problems. And it's just not happening.
It's not true. Exactly.
I've talked about this with some conservative people in my circle, And they say, okay, illegal immigrants might not commit more crimes than natives, but an illegal immigrant committing one crime at all is too many because they shouldn't have been here in the first place. And I'm like, well, that's just not how any of this works.
No.
Because we're talking about that, like, it's just not how it works. The country is safer if more people are in it, and then less people get hurt, like per the population, right?
Yeah.
It's like a per capita versus gross number misunderstanding that's hard to get through. I see that. That's actually like something that I've dealt with a lot talking to people of different political opinions, is just trying to get them to understand what per capita means. Have you had that experience?
No.
Literally all the time. I just try to teach people what the term per capita means, or like trying to adjust things per sizes of a population.
Yeah.
And they just can't understand why.
Well, to me, the way to explain this would be, okay, so some of the victims of crimes, if illegal immigrants are here, are going to be illegal immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just that the crimes committed by illegal immigrants could be hurting U.S. natives. It's that now some of the crimes committed by U.S. natives will hurt illegal immigrants instead of hurting other U.S. natives.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would probably say to that person, does that fix your worries, fix your concerns?
And they probably say no.
Yeah.
But this is one of those things where it's very easy to be anti-illegal immigrants. It's very easy. They broke the law. Get out of the country. You broke the law. But when they're committing less crimes than you, I mean...
and they're helping the economy.
And they're helping the economy. What are you going to say to that?
Yeah.
And that's just what sucks. And so with this constant explosion of anti-immigrant rhetoric, Ron DeSantis, who is currently running for president, has taken it upon himself to pass a very, very, very powerful anti-immigration law that does the following in Florida. It requires hospitals to collect information on immigrant status if the hospital receives Medicaid funding. It puts in place of penalties for hiring undocumented workers. It expands online employment verification screenings, requiring to all employers with over 25 employees. Invalidates out-of-state driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. Establishes criminal penalties for transporting undocumented immigrants. Increases the funding to relocate or bus migrants to other parts of the United States. It expands the authority of Florida Department of Law Enforcement to carry out immigration enforcement, and employers are not allowed to provide ID cards for those who can't provide citizenship. 2 of these would have been an extreme bill. All of them together is
the most extreme immigration bill we've ever seen.
This on a national scale would be insanity.
Yeah.
This on a national scale would be insanity. The fact that he's talking about, one of the things I think are so dangerous right off the bat, laws requiring hospitals to collect information of immigration status. So many illegal immigrants will not be going to the doctor anymore because they're afraid that they're going to get their cards and their papers checked and they're going to get kicked out of the country. Mm. That's going to have massive negative impacts on the health of our people. The American Medical Association suggests avoiding this type of legislation at all costs, and it's exactly what Ron DeSantis has done.
Yeah.
On top of that, Florida is in a massive, massive labor shortage. They currently have an unemployment rate of 2.6% and have only 0.4% unemployed people for each job opening. That's one of the lowest in the nation. The best in the nation is New York at 0.9.
Okay.
So for every open job, there are only 0.4 unemployed people.
Okay.
Meaning that it's just so tight.
Yeah.
And now, non-citizen immigrants, which are 8% of Florida's population and 11% of Florida's overall workforce, are now going to be directly discriminated against in the workplace.
Yeah, and they're afraid to go into work because this E-Verify system means that if they go into work and they're caught, they get deported.
They're de-incentivizing economic activity, and they're incentivizing these immigrants to leave. Mm-hmm. And there are specific sectors of the economy that are going to be massively negative affected. So Florida has a huge agricultural sector, right? Well, 37% of agricultural workers are non-citizens. 37% of them. You're going to tell me that you're going to get rid of 37% of an industry's workforce and there aren't going to be massive consequences, you're high if you think that. There are going to be massive consequences to this, and he doesn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't see it. Other things, construction, 24%, service, 14%, transportation, 14%. Florida needs to have a construction boom because of the absolute housing nightmare that Florida is in.
Yeah, not to mention hurricane season every year. You
Every year.
need to fix things across the board every year.
Instantly.
Yeah.
And you're going to try to get rid of a quarter of the workforce? I mean, why would you do that? Why would you do that?
Well, the answer, of course,
Right.
is pure xenophobia.
Massive xenophobia.
I think.
It's all it is.
And that's what like most of the anti-immigration rhetoric is. I mean, there's they're going to take our jobs, but it's generally just we don't want people who didn't grow up here.
Mm-hmm. They just don't think that they can assimilate / coexist. And you're wrong if you think that. You're just wrong.
And it's a perfect, to me, it's a perfect conservative talking point.
Yeah.
Because they love, and I think politicians in general love to do this, because it's not politically viable to criticize America for our own problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? But Trump is like the perfect example of criticizing the other.
Yeah.
Right? And illegal immigrants are just a perfect example for that.
And we're talking there's about 10 million illegal immigrants in the country. 10.2 million is the number I got.
Yeah.
What is that? 3% of the population?
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying all of our problems are because of 3% of the population? If we had more of them, crime would be lower and wages would be up.
Yeah.
So the only issue is your xenophobia.
Yes.
And that's the point that I think we really want to get across here is the economic impacts of immigration are only positive. The population effects are only positive.
Mm-hmm.
Having more people is a good thing.
Yeah.
We are talking about China graying out and having too many old people. If America wants to beat that and beat that international trend, we need more people of working age who are going to be able to contribute to our entitlement programs now.
Because our demographics are also we're not getting younger.
Right.
Our population is getting older. We're not as bad as a China or a Russia, but our workforce is getting smaller and we can use this economic development. Now, something that I really want to harp on here is how much of a political liability it is to talk favorably about immigration, because even on the Democrat side, most people will say that they favor more control at the border.
Mm-hmm.
There's this general idea that immigration is bad and that we need more border control. And that exists on the Democrat side as well. The only difference is that on the Democrat side, it's less of a prominent thing. It's more loudly communicated on the Republican side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we'll lead the charge in this show. We've read articles about it. The solution is not to out more illegal immigrants. It's to make a more robust legal immigration system.
Yes.
It's going to help everyone across the board. It's going to, and if we can have a little bit of compassion and you can think about how much it's going to help the people who are actually coming into our country, that it's likely that there is no better effect that something can have on a poor person's life than moving from a poor country to a rich country.
The perfect anti-poverty program is moving to America.
Literally.
That's the anti-poverty program from heaven right there.
Yeah. So we just need to harp on that. The one other thing I want to talk about is drug trade.
Yes.
Right?
If we talked about immigration without talking about the drug trade, we would be doing a disservice.
Yes. So there's this idea that we can maybe stop fentanyl. I think you talked about the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah, I talked about the fentanyl crisis probably 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think it's one of the biggest problems in America right now.
Yeah. Over 70,000 Americans die every year from fentanyl overdoses. I think there was one drug bust where there was enough fentanyl.
Yeah, we talked about this 3 weeks ago. Enough to kill every single person in the country.
50 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge problem, basically, and it comes from precursors that are exported from China to the cartels in Mexico who make the fentanyl in their labs, and they smuggle it up here. Now, there are people who think that sealing the border could prevent fentanyl from coming in. And we want to talk about why we think that is specifically wrong.
Totally wrong.
So, fentanyl is so potent that a dose of 2 milligrams can kill you. 2 milligrams is 2 milligrams. I'm trying to think.
How would you even explain what 2 milligrams is like?
Like how 10 grams is remarkably easy to smuggle in a car.
Mm-hmm.
Like to not be found despite a routine check. And the thing is, even if the border is sealed, you have to think there are people that are just driving from San Diego down into Mexico for vacation. So there are still a bunch of roads coming in and out, right, of the southern border.
Yeah.
And at those roads, sure, you do have customs officers checking these cars, but they don't have the technology or the capability to possibly find the fentanyl that's going through those checkpoints.
And so most of the fentanyl that's coming into the country is coming through the checkpoint systems.
Yes.
They're going through these custom officers. They're not getting smuggled across the Rio Grande. That's not what's happening.
And the Rio Grande is where the illegal immigrants are coming from.
Right. Right. So they're not coming with the illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
They're coming through the custom offices. And they're coming through the custom offices, and we need to find better ways to identify the fentanyl at those points of entry. And I will be massively in favor of increasing funding for the border control agencies so that they can better find the fentanyl in any way possible at these points of entry.
This is where I probably have a controversial view that, and honestly, we could do a deep dive into here. I don't know if it's worth spending resources on that.
You don't think?
Because I legitimately think the cartel will always be way better funded than anything we try. And I think that we might just be throwing money into a sinkhole.
And they'll just find a way around it.
They'll always find a way around it. And I think that resources will be better spent if we accept that fentanyl will come to the country and we try to fix the root causes of people using drugs and treating those who are using.
I don't think that's a controversial opinion at all. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you can totally see a reality where it's actually more fiscally beneficial to treat fentanyl as a disease rather than trying to cut it off at the source, because there's no way to actually cut it off because you can never succeed.
No.
I don't know what the numbers are, and I would have to see, but I'm definitely currently in favor of doing whatever's possible to stop fentanyl coming in. But it needs to be done right. It's not, the answer is not a border wall, people. It's not that, because that's not where fentanyl comes from.
No.
A wall is not going to stop fentanyl when it's basically driving around whatever wall you're going to build up anyway.
Yeah. No, a wall, especially after learning what we have about illegal immigration, a wall is probably the biggest waste of money that I could imagine.
Yeah.
The government spending.
I can't think of a bigger waste of money than that.
Yeah. Because it's not only wasting money, it's actively hurting our economy.
You're actually missing out on potential money.
Yes.
It's like the worst investment. It's a negative investment.
And to me, that just really highlights how xenophobic the American public, and specifically the conservative side of the American public, is, because there's such resonance in the rhetoric for building a wall.
I know. But what's crazy is we read this paper from the Cato Institute. Cato Institute is a massively right-wing organization.
But libertarian. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're right-wing, but they're
purely economically right-wing.
Right. They're purely, which is like, okay, you make economic sense here with all of this research. It's awesome. So, and now they're having an issue. I think, honestly, the Cato Institute people, the fact that they're putting out this study showing that crime is not a big problem among illegal immigrants, it's like they're trying to prove to their own, guys, stop being so xenophobic, please.
Yeah. Because
of all these economic benefits, we need to be taking advantage of it. And there's been movements to do immigration reform in this country. In 2013, there was a group called the Gang of Eight in the Senate that put up a whole immigration bill. And Marco Rubio was actually spearheading a lot of the legislation. Massive Republican from Florida. I think it was a newcomer at the time, or at least relatively new. And Republicans shit all over it. Sean Hannity, who was initially for the immigration bill, ended up getting hate from his audience and had to go against the bill afterwards.
Really?
And there was Fox News, when it was coming out, was in favor of the immigration bill. After it got pushback from the audience, the rhetoric on Fox News changed.
Wow. I mean, that does make sense as far as Fox News. It does make me think, if Democrats were more vocal about being pro-immigration, could they win some of these libertarian votes?
I totally think they could.
When I think about a libertarian, right, they're Republican only because of the economics, right? But this, to me, doesn't seem like this is an economic issue that the Democrats could totally take up.
Completely take up.
Yeah.
And look, what we're saying is we don't want more illegal immigration. As Ben said already, we want better and easier ways to do legal immigration.
Yes.
We want you to be able to get in here pending specific background checks and issues with national security. You can come into this country, get a social security card, start paying your taxes, and become a member of America from day one.
Exactly.
That's what we want. We want you to be a paying member of our society, contributing to our economy, and we want you to be our neighbor.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say in addition to this is the illegal immigrants currently here should be legalized.
Totally.
As well.
Everyone should be granted citizenship.
Pending the same background checks.
Yeah. Yes, I am totally in favor of all that. We've read other studies talking about the benefits of amnesty too, but that's too much information. Point is, amnesty is a good thing.
Yeah. Let them stay here legally.
Let them stay here legally. Let them just keep doing what they're doing, guys.
Yeah, they're good for us. So please believe us. And libertarians and Democrats become vocal about this. And libertarians are already mostly, as far as I know, on the Democrat side as far as social politics.
Yeah.
So let's give them an economic bone to chew on.
And this is like less of a compromise and more of a common understanding.
Exactly.
Right. It's less of a compromise and being like, oh wait, we both agree on the exact same thing. There's no compromise necessary.
Yeah.
I don't like I hate when there's open borders rhetoric. Or like when there's questions on the debate stage, during the 2020 primary for the Democrats, Bernie Sanders was talking about Medicare for all, and he was asked, "Do you think illegal immigrants will be covered under Medicare for all?" And he said, "Yes, that's the right answer." But that is an answer that is like the moral and correct policy. But the best answer is, in my administration, there will be no illegal immigrant because we will push for amnesty and make sure that they are paying taxes effectively and are not undercutting American workers in wage negotiations and are not taking advantage of American systems and making sure that they pay their taxes.
Yeah.
That's what you have to say.
Exactly. It's almost like they're just scared that it's too complex.
Right.
They're scared that Americans can't get past the idea of they want to let more others in.
And they can't get past that.
No.
America's had issues like this in the past. We've had the Chinese Exclusion Act where we made it illegal for Asians to immigrate to America. We were very anti-Irish. We were anti-Italian. We are now anti-Mexican. It's going to switch to some other at some point again soon. You know what I mean?
We need to stop this wheel from turning.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I think that was an amazing episode.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I'm on fire right now.
I'm rock hard.
Yeah, I'm rock hard. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Yeah.
Go follow us on the socials if you don't. Odds are you do. But if you don't, everything sucks. Let's fix it on Instagram,
es.lfi on YouTube and TikTok.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.